A widow with nothing but a crying baby stands at a ranch gate begging for coins to buy milk. The cold-eyed rancher is seconds from turning her away when his daughter, silent for months since her mother's death, suddenly speaks. "Don't send her away, Papa." What happens next will shatter every rule Ethan Cole lived by. A summer storm, a life or death night, and one whispered confession will transform three broken souls into something neither charity nor duty could ever create. Stay until the end to see how a request for milk became a battle for belonging. Like this video and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The heat pressed down on the Kansas prairie like a physical weight, shimmering in waves that made the horizon dance and blur. Dust devils spun lazily across the open grassland, and the few trees that had managed to take root stood stark and alone against the bleached summer sky. It was the kind of heat that made men irritable and animals listless, the kind that sucked moisture from everything it touched and left the earth cracked and thirsting. Eliza Moore felt that heat burning through the thin fabric of her dress as she walked the final mile toward Redfield Ranch. Her boots, worn thin at the soles and splitting at one seam, raised small clouds of dust with each step. The bundle against her chest stirred and whimpered, and she adjusted the cloth wrapping to better shade her son's face from the relentless sun. "Hush now, Thomas," she whispered, though her throat was so dry the words came out cracked and rough. "Just a little farther." She'd been walking since dawn, and the sun was now high overhead, probably past noon. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she forced them to keep moving. The weight of her near-empty basket seemed to mock her. Inside were 3 eggs, carefully wrapped, and a small jar of preserves she'd made from the last of the wild berries she'd found near the creek. It wasn't much to trade, but it was all she had. The ranch appeared gradually through the heat shimmer, first the fence post dark against the pale grass, then the buildings themselves. Eliza had heard of Redfield Ranch even in her previous life, back when she'd had a different name and a different future. Everyone in 3 counties knew of Ethan Cole, the man who'd built an empire from nothing but stubbornness and sweat. They said he was fair but hard, generous to those who earned it, but merciless to those who tried to take advantage. Eliza hoped the stories were true. She hoped he was the kind of man who would at least hear her out before sending her away. The iron gate stood closed, but not locked, its hinges well-oiled and its bars free of rust, small details that spoke of careful maintenance and pride. Beyond it, the ranch spread out in organized efficiency. A large main house with a wide porch, a barn that looked sturdy enough to withstand any storm, corrals with good fencing, and several smaller outbuildings arranged with practical precision. Eliza stood at that gate for a long moment, gathering her courage. Thomas squirmed against her chest, making small, hungry sounds that tore at her heart. She had perhaps a day's worth of milk left, maybe 2 if she stretched it impossibly thin. After that, she refused to think about after that. Taking a deep breath, Eliza pushed the gate open. The metal sang softly, and she stepped onto the property, making her way up the long drive toward the main house. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from physical exhaustion, but from the weight of what she was about to do. Present herself as someone in need, someone without power or position, someone asking for help. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. She was halfway to the house when a voice rang out, sharp and commanding. "That's far enough." Eliza stopped, her heart hammering. A man emerged from the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, his face shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. He moved with the easy confidence of someone on his own land, someone who knew exactly where he stood in the world. As he came closer, Eliza could make out more details. Dark hair touched with gray at the temples, a face weathered by sun and wind, eyes the color of storm clouds that assessed her with cool precision. Ethan Cole. It had to be. "Mr. Cole?" Eliza's voice came out stronger than she'd expected, though she could feel herself swaying slightly on her feet. "I am." He stopped about 10 feet away, his posture neither welcoming nor hostile, simply watchful. "And you are?" "Eliza Moore, sir." She shifted Thomas slightly, and the movement drew Ethan's attention to the bundle against her chest. Something flickered across his face. Was it sympathy? Annoyance? Before his expression settled back into neutral assessment. I'm sorry to come unannounced. I wouldn't trouble you except you need something. It wasn't a question. Ethan's gaze moved from her face to the basket on her arm, taking in its near emptiness, then back to her face. Everyone who comes to my gate needs something. The words weren't unkind, just matter of fact, but they stung nonetheless. Eliza forced herself to meet his eyes directly. I need to buy milk, sir, for my son. I have eggs to trade and preserves, and I can work. I don't run a charity, Mrs. Moore. I'm not asking for charity. Eliza heard the edge enter her voice and tried to soften it. Desperation wouldn't help her case. I'm asking for work. I can cook, clean, mend. I'm willing to earn what I need. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Eliza could almost see him calculating the cost of giving her work versus the trouble she might bring, the value of her labor against the resources she'd consume. She held herself as straight as her exhausted body would allow, refusing to let him see how close she was to collapse. Where's your husband? The question landed like a blow, but Eliza had expected it. Dead, sir. Fever took him 2 months back. Family? None that would have me. The admission tasted bitter, but there was no point in lying. I have no one. Something shifted in Ethan's face at that, some barely perceptible change that Eliza couldn't quite read. Before he could respond, a sound came from the house, the creak of the front door opening. Papa? Both Eliza and Ethan turned toward the voice. A small figure stood in the doorway, partially hidden in shadow. As Eliza's eyes adjusted, she could make out a girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair that hung in tangles around a pale face. The child wore a dress that had seen better days, and her feet were bare despite the heat that must have made the porch boards almost too hot to stand on. Lucy? Ethan's voice had changed completely, all the hard edges smoothed into something gentler. Go back inside. It's too hot out here. But the girl didn't move. Instead, she stepped further onto the porch, her eyes fixed not on her father, but on Eliza. More specifically, on the bundle Eliza carried. Is that a baby? Lucy's voice held a note of wonder that seemed at odds with her general appearance of neglect. Lucy? I said inside. Yes. Eliza found herself answering the child directly, something in that small voice cutting through all her defenses. His name is Thomas. He's 3 months old. Lucy took another step forward, then another, completely ignoring her father's command. Ethan made a sound of frustration but didn't physically stop her as she came down the porch steps and crossed the yard. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. Can I see him? Lucy had stopped a few feet away, her eyes huge in her small face. Eliza glanced at Ethan, who looked torn between exasperation and something that might have been resignation. He gave a tiny nod, and Eliza carefully adjusted the cloth wrapping so Lucy could see Thomas's face. The baby was awake, his dark eyes unfocused but content, one tiny fist working its way toward his mouth. Lucy stared at him with an intensity that was almost unnerving, then slowly reached out one finger. Eliza held perfectly still as the girl gently, so gently, touched Thomas's hand. The baby's fingers immediately curled around Lucy's finger in the instinctive grip of infants, and a sound escaped Lucy, something between a gasp and a laugh. He's holding me, she whispered, and there was such pure delight in her voice that Eliza felt her throat tighten. He likes you. Eliza wasn't sure why she said it, maybe because the girl looked like she needed to hear it, looked like she'd been starved for any kind of warmth or connection. Lucy looked up at Eliza then, really looked at her, and Eliza saw something in those young eyes that struck her to the core, a loneliness that mirrored her own, a hunger for something that had nothing to do with food or shelter. Lucy, Ethan's voice was firmer now, let Mrs. Moore be. She's hot and tired, and we haven't even offered her water. The words were a dismissal, but there was something different in his tone now. Lucy reluctantly released Thomas's hand and stepped back, but her eyes never left Eliza's face. Ethan moved closer, and now Eliza could see the lines around his eyes, the weariness that lived in them despite the strength of his bearing. You look like you're about to fall over, he said bluntly. Come up to the house. At least get some water in you before we discuss anything else. It wasn't the agreement she'd hoped for, but it was something. Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice, and followed Ethan toward the house. Lucy walked beside her, so close their shoulders almost touched, stealing glances at Thomas every few seconds. The porch provided blessed relief from the sun, and the inside of the house was cooler still, the thick walls and shuttered windows keeping the worst of the heat at bay. Eliza's eyes took a moment to adjust to the dimmer light, and when they did, she found herself in a large main room that served as both kitchen and living area. The space was clean but Spartan, functional without being comfortable. A long table dominated the center of the room, its surface scrubbed but unadorned. The kitchen area showed signs of regular use but lacked any personal touches. No curtains on the windows, no decorative items on the shelves, no warmth beyond basic necessity. "Sit." Ethan gestured to one of the chairs at the table. Eliza sank into it gratefully, her legs nearly giving out with relief. She set her basket on the floor and adjusted Thomas, who was starting to fuss. Ethan moved to the water pump at the counter, working the handle until clear water gushed into a tin cup. He brought it to Eliza, and she drank deeply, the cool liquid the most wonderful thing she'd tasted in days. He filled the cup twice more, and she drank both helplessly, her body crying out for the moisture it had lost in the long walk under the merciless sun. Lucy had positioned herself in a chair right next to Eliza, her eyes still fixed on Thomas with that same unnerving intensity. The baby had begun to cry in earnest now, the hungry wail that Eliza had come to dread because she had so little to give him. "He's hungry," Lucy observed. "Yes." Eliza rocked Thomas gently, trying to soothe him even as her own anxiety spiked. She had maybe one more feeding's worth of milk back in the small room she'd been staying in at the boarding house, if she could even call it that. The landlady had made it clear this morning that Eliza's credit had run out. If she didn't return with payment by evening, she and Thomas would be locked out. Ethan was watching her with that same assessing gaze, and Eliza could feel the heat of shame creeping up her neck. She was being judged, measured, found wanting or sufficient. She wouldn't know which until he spoke. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked. The question surprised her. "I had some bread this morning." "That's not what I asked." Eliza pressed her lips together. "Yesterday. I ate yesterday." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he moved to the pantry and returned with a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a jar of what looked like apple butter. He set them on the table in front of Eliza with a knife and plate. "Eat." It wasn't a request. Eliza wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some dignity, but Thomas's cries were growing more frantic, and she knew she couldn't feed him properly if she herself was starving. With shaking hands, she cut the bread and cheese, spreading the apple butter with careful precision, trying not to appear too desperate even as her stomach cramped with hunger. The first bite was almost painful, her body reacting violently to the sudden influx of food after so long with so little. She forced herself to eat slowly, to chew thoroughly, while Thomas screamed against her chest, and Lucy watched everything with those two knowing eyes. "Papa," Lucy spoke suddenly, her voice quiet but clear. "She needs milk. For the baby." "I know that, Lucy. So we should give her some. We have lots. It's not that simple." "Why not?" There was no challenge in Lucy's tone, just genuine confusion. "We have it. They need it. That's simple." Ethan looked at his daughter with an expression Eliza couldn't quite read, frustration mixed with something that might have been pride or pain or both. "Lucy, go check on the chickens. Make sure they have enough water." "But now, please." Lucy's face fell, but she slid off her chair without further argument. She cast one last longing glance at Thomas before slipping out the back door, leaving Eliza alone with Ethan and a screaming baby. The silence after Lucy left was heavy, broken only by Thomas's cries. Eliza finished the bread and cheese quickly, her body demanding the fuel even as her mind raced through possibilities and plans. She had to convince this man to help her, had to find some way to make herself useful enough that he'd take a chance on her. "Mrs. Moore?" Ethan's voice cut through her thoughts. He'd taken a seat across from her, his large hands folded on the table. "I'm going to be direct with you because I don't believe in wasting time. You show up here with a baby and nothing else, asking for work. That tells me you're desperate, which means you're either running from something or running towards something. Either way, it usually means trouble. I'm not trouble. Eliza met his eyes, forcing steel into her voice. I'm a widow trying to keep her son alive, that's all. That's never all. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Where were you living before? Elsewhere. When his eyes narrowed, Eliza added, In town. A boarding house. But I can't afford it anymore. What about your husband's family, his people? They didn't approve of the marriage. When he died, they made it clear I wasn't welcome. And your own family? Also made their position clear. Eliza felt the familiar anger rising and pushed it down. Mr. Cole, I'm not here to tell you my life story or beg for your pity. I'm here to propose a fair trade, my labor for what I need to survive. If you're not interested, just say so, and I'll try elsewhere. It was a bluff, and they both knew it. There was nowhere else to go, no other options left. But Eliza would be damned if she'd sit here and grovel. Something that might have been respect flickered across Ethan's face. You have spirit. I'll give you that. And you're right. I'm not interested in your life story. What I'm interested in is whether you can work, whether you'll cause problems, and whether you're going to disappear in the middle of the night with whatever you can carry. I can work harder than anyone you've ever hired, Eliza said, her voice steady despite Thomas's continued crying. I won't cause problems because I can't afford to, and I won't steal because I'm not a thief. I'm asking for a chance to prove myself. 1 week, that's all. If I'm not worth keeping after a week, I'll go without complaint. Ethan studied her for a long moment, his fingers drumming slowly on the table. Eliza could practically see him weighing the risks, calculating the odds. Finally, he spoke. 1 week. You'll cook, clean, do laundry, mend what needs mending, and help with whatever else needs doing. In exchange, you get a roof over your head, food for yourself and the baby, and whatever milk you need. At the end of the week, I'll decide if you stay or go. If I tell you to leave, you leave immediately. No arguments, no begging for more time. Understood? Relief flooded through Eliza so intensely she felt dizzy. Understood. Thank you, Mr. Cole. I won't let you down. See that you don't. Ethan stood. There's a small room off the kitchen, used to be for live-in help. You can stay there. It's not much, but it's private and secure. I'll show you where everything is, and you can start tomorrow morning. For today, get yourself settled and rest. I can start today, Eliza said quickly, already pushing her chair back. I don't need rest. Whatever needs doing, tomorrow. Ethan's voice was firm. You look like you're about to collapse, and a half-dead worker is worse than no worker at all. Take today to recover. Tomorrow, you work. There was no point in arguing, and Eliza was too exhausted to try. She nodded, clutching Thomas close as Ethan led her through a doorway off the kitchen into a small room barely large enough for a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair. But it had a window, a door that closed, and, most importantly, a lock on the inside. There are sheets in the chest, Ethan said, pausing in the doorway. And Lucy's old cradle is in the barn if you want it for the baby. I'll have her bring it in. Thank you. Eliza's voice was barely a whisper. Ethan nodded once and turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Moore? Lucy. She doesn't talk much. Hasn't since her mother died 2 years ago. So if she seems strange or too quiet, that's why. She's not usually so... He trailed off, seeming unable to find the right word. Interested? Eliza supplied gently. Yes. Ethan's expression was unreadable. She's not usually interested in anything anymore, but she seems to be interested in you and your boy. He left before Eliza could respond, pulling the door closed behind him. She stood in the small room, swaying slightly, Thomas finally quieting against her chest as exhaustion claimed him. Through the window, she could hear voices, Ethan's deep rumble and Lucy's lighter tone, though she couldn't make out the words. Eliza sank onto the bare mattress, her legs finally giving out completely. She should make the bed, should unpack her meager belongings, should do something productive. Instead, she simply sat there, Thomas sleeping in her arms, and let the reality of the past few hours wash over her. She had a week, 7 days to prove herself indispensable, to become so valuable that Ethan Cole couldn't imagine running his household without her. 7 days to secure a future for herself and her son. It would have to be enough. The rest of that first day passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. Lucy had indeed brought the cradle, carefully setting it up in the corner of Eliza's small room without being asked. The girl had lingered, watching as Eliza made up the bed with the clean sheets from the chest, her presence oddly comforting rather than intrusive. "My mama used to sleep in this room," Lucy had said quietly, running her hand along the cradle's worn wood. "Before she married Papa. She was the housekeeper then." Eliza had paused in her work, struck by the information. So Ethan Cole had married his housekeeper. That explained some things: the sparse, functional nature of the house, the lack of feminine touches that might have been expected in a rancher's home. It also made Eliza's position here more complex than she'd realized. Was she following in a dead woman's footsteps? Would every task she performed be compared to how Lucy's mother had done it? "She must have been a wonderful woman," Eliza had said carefully. Lucy had nodded slowly. "She was. She made Papa laugh. He doesn't laugh anymore." The sadness in those words had cut deep, and Eliza had found herself reaching out to touch Lucy's shoulder gently. The girl had looked up at her with those two old eyes, and for a moment Eliza had seen herself reflected there. Two people trying to survive in a world that had taken too much from them. As evening fell, Ethan had brought a pail of fresh milk and left it outside Eliza's door without comment. She'd fed Thomas, watched him drift into satisfied sleep in the cradle, and then allowed herself to collapse onto the bed fully clothed. She was asleep before the last light faded from the sky. She woke to the sound of roosters crowing, her body stiff and protesting after months of poor sleep and poor nutrition. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and panic seized her. Then Thomas made a small sound in his cradle, and memory flooded back. Redfield Ranch, 1 week to prove herself. Starting now. Eliza rose quickly, tending to Thomas first, then washing her face in the basin of water someone, probably Lucy, had left on the chest of drawers. She brushed and repinned her hair, smoothed her dress as best she could, and stepped out into the kitchen just as dawnlight began to paint the eastern sky. The house was silent, but she could hear movement outside, the sounds of a ranch waking to another day of work. Eliza moved through the kitchen, familiarizing herself with its layout, finding flour and eggs and lard, locating the cast iron pans and the coffee pot. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, building up the fire in the stove, mixing batter for flapjacks, setting coffee to brew. She was flipping the third batch of flapjacks when Ethan appeared in the doorway, stopping short at the sight of her working. "I thought I told you to start today, not at dawn." "It is today," Eliza replied, not pausing in her work. "And breakfast should be ready when people wake up, not an hour after they've already started working." Ethan grunted, but she thought she detected approval in the sound. He poured himself coffee, drinking it black and strong, watching her work with that same assessing gaze he'd used yesterday. "Where'd you learn to cook?" "My mother. Before—" Eliza caught herself. No life story, she'd said. No begging for pity. "Before I married." "And where did you live?" "Before you married?" "East of here." When Ethan's expression indicated that wasn't enough, Eliza added reluctantly, "Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Long way from home." "Not home anymore." Eliza slid the flapjacks onto a plate. "Should I wake Lucy?" "She'll be up soon enough. Girl's an early riser, always has been." Ethan took the plate she offered, studying the food with what looked like suspicion. "These look good." "They are good." Eliza poured her own coffee, adding a precious spoonful of sugar from the bowl on the table. "I may not have much, Mr. Cole, but I know how to cook." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and something in his expression eased. "Yes, you do." It was perhaps the highest praise she could have hoped for, and Eliza felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. 1 meal down, 20 more to go before the week ended. Lucy appeared a few minutes later, her hair unbrushed and her dress wrinkled from sleep. She moved directly to Eliza's side, ignoring her father completely, her eyes seeking out the small room where Thomas still slept. "He's still sleeping," Eliza told her gently. "Would you like some breakfast?" Lucy nodded and climbed into the chair beside Eliza's. Eliza served her flapjacks with a generous drizzle of syrup, noting how thin the girl was, how her collarbones stood out sharply beneath her dress. Whatever had been happening in this house since Lucy's mother died, proper care of the child hadn't been part of it. They ate in relative silence, the only sounds the scrape of forks on plates and the distant lowing of cattle. Ethan finished quickly, draining his coffee cup and standing. "I'll be working the north pasture today," he said, addressing his words to the room rather than anyone specifically. "Lucy, you stay close to the house. Mrs. Moore, do whatever needs doing. If you have questions, ask Lucy. She knows where everything is." And then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him, leaving Eliza alone with his daughter and a house that clearly needed far more attention than 1 week could provide. Eliza looked at Lucy, and Lucy looked back at her, and in that moment, an understanding passed between them. Two females in a household that had been operating on autopilot for far too long, now given permission to change things. "Well then," Eliza said briskly, standing and beginning to clear the table. "Let's see what we're working with." What they were working with, it turned out, was chaos hidden beneath a veneer of order. The main rooms were clean enough, but a deeper inspection revealed months, perhaps years, of neglect. Curtains that needed washing, windows that needed cleaning, pantry items that needed organizing, clothes that needed mending. The list seemed endless. Lucy followed Eliza from room to room, occasionally offering information about where things were kept or what her mother used to do. The girl seemed to bloom under the attention, her face losing some of its pinched, closed-off quality. When Thomas woke and began to fuss, Lucy begged to hold him, and Eliza found herself carefully transferring the baby into the girl's thin arms, showing her how to support his head, watching closely as Lucy gazed down at the infant with wonder. "He's so small," Lucy whispered. "He won't be for long. Babies grow fast." "Will you stay after the week?" The question was asked so quietly, Eliza almost didn't hear it. She chose her words carefully. "I hope so, but that's up to your father. Papa needs help. He thinks he doesn't, but he does." Lucy looked up at Eliza, her dark eyes serious. "The house is sad. Since Mama died, everything's been sad." Eliza's heart clenched. "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry." Lucy's voice was matter-of-fact. "Just stay. Make it not sad anymore." If only it were that simple, but Eliza didn't say that. Instead, she smiled and gently took Thomas back, settling him in the makeshift sling she'd fashioned to keep him close while she worked. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work in earnest. By mid-afternoon, she'd washed every dish in the house, scrubbed the kitchen floor until it gleamed, organized the pantry, and started a stew for supper with vegetables from the root cellar and beef from the cold storage. Lucy had helped with everything, her small hands surprisingly capable, her presence a constant source of quiet companionship. They were hanging wash on the line behind the house when Eliza heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She tensed instinctively, old habits from old dangers, then forced herself to relax when she saw it was just a ranch hand riding up to the barn. The man, weathered and gray-haired, glanced toward the house and did a visible double-take at the sight of Eliza and Lucy working together. "Lucy's helping," the girl said proudly, as if reading Eliza's thoughts. "Nobody lets me help with the washing usually." "Well, you're very good at it," Eliza assured her, handing her another wet cloth to hang. They finished the washing and moved on to mending, setting up on the porch, where the light was good and the breeze provided relief from the heat. Eliza had found a basket full of clothes that needed attention, missing buttons, torn seams, frayed hems. She set to work while Lucy played quietly nearby, occasionally bringing Thomas back to Eliza when he needed feeding or changing. It was peaceful, almost dangerously so. Eliza had learned not to trust peace, had learned that it was usually the prelude to something breaking, something going wrong. But for this moment, with the late afternoon sun warm on her face and the rhythmic pull of needle through fabric, she allowed herself to simply exist without fear. The sound of a wagon approaching broke the spell. Eliza looked up to see a buckboard rolling up the drive, driven by an older woman with iron-gray hair and a dress so perfectly pressed it seemed impossible she'd been driving through prairie dust. Beside her sat a younger woman, perhaps Eliza's age, with blonde hair arranged in elaborate curls and a dress that belonged at a social gathering, not a working ranch. Lucy's entire body went rigid. "Papa's not going to like this." "Who are they?" Eliza asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew. Mrs. Winterton and her daughter Charlotte. They come sometimes. Papa sends them away. The wagon pulled up to the house, and the younger woman, Charlotte, stepped down with practiced grace, her eyes immediately finding Lucy on the porch. "Why, Lucy, dear, how lovely to see you. Doesn't she look adorable, Mother?" The words were syrupy sweet, but there was something calculating in Charlotte's eyes as they moved from Lucy to Eliza, taking in her worn dress, her simple appearance, her position on the porch with needle and thread. "Good afternoon," Eliza said evenly, setting aside her mending and standing. Thomas was asleep in his sling against her chest, and she kept one hand on him protectively. "And who might you be?" Mrs. Winterton's voice was sharp despite her smile. "Eliza Moore, ma'am. I'm the new housekeeper." "Housekeeper!" Charlotte's laugh was like wind chimes, bright and false. "Why, I didn't know Ethan was looking for help. How wonderful! When did you start?" "Yesterday." Eliza saw no point in elaborating. "Well?" Mrs. Winterton stepped onto the porch uninvited, her eyes cataloging everything, the wash on the line, the mending basket, Eliza herself. "Is Mr. Cole at home?" "He's working the north pasture, ma'am." "Then we'll just have to wait for him, won't we?" Mrs. Winterton settled herself in one of the porch chairs as if she owned it. "Charlotte, dear, come sit. We haven't had a proper visit with dear Lucy in weeks." But Lucy had already disappeared, slipping away so quietly that Eliza hadn't even noticed her go. Charlotte's smile tightened. "Such a shy little thing, nothing like her mother. Surely you remember Sarah, Mother? So vivacious, so full of life." "Indeed." Mrs. Winterton's gaze was fixed on Eliza. "Tell me, Mrs. Moore, it is Mrs., isn't it? What brings you to Redfield Ranch? It's rather unusual for a woman with an infant to take a position so far from civilization." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Eliza met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I needed work, and Mr. Cole needed help. It seemed a good fit." Mrs. Winterton's expression suggested she found this explanation entirely insufficient. "And your husband? Where is he?" "Dead, ma'am." "How tragic." Charlotte's voice dripped false sympathy. "You poor thing, left all alone with a baby. How did he die, if you don't mind my asking?" "Fever. And you have no family to help you?" "No, ma'am." "How dreadful." Mrs. Winterton's tone suggested she was thoroughly enjoying this interrogation. "Well, I'm sure Mr. Cole is being generous in taking you in. He's always been too kind-hearted for his own good. Why, after Sarah died, we thought he'd work himself to death. Didn't we, Charlotte?" "Oh, yes, Mother, it was terribly sad. Such a loss for both Ethan and poor little Lucy." She preferred Sarah to Sarah, actually. The voice came from behind them. Ethan stood at the bottom of the porch steps, his face unreadable, but his eyes cold. "My wife preferred to be called Sarah, not Sarah. She was very particular about that." Mrs. Winterton's smile didn't waver, but something brittle entered her expression. "Of course, Ethan. My apologies. We simply stopped by to check on Lucy, I'm sure." Ethan moved past them onto the porch, his boots leaving dusty prints on the boards Eliza had scrubbed that morning. "As you can see, she's fine. Mrs. Moore, is there coffee?" It took Eliza a moment to realize he was asking her to provide an excuse for him to go inside. "Yes, sir. Fresh pot just made." "Good." Ethan opened the door, glancing back at the two women. "I'm sure you ladies have other visits to make. Don't let me keep you." It was a dismissal so clear that even Mrs. Winterton couldn't ignore it. She rose with stiff dignity, Charlotte following suit. "Well, it was lovely to see you, Ethan, and you, Mrs. Moore. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of you." The threat in those words was unmistakable. Eliza said nothing, simply nodded politely as the two women climbed back into their wagon and drove away, Mrs. Winterton's back ramrod straight with offense. When they were gone, Ethan let out a long breath and turned to Eliza. "I apologize for that. Those women—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "They mean well?" Eliza supplied, though she didn't believe it for a second. "They mean to marry Charlotte off to me, and they've been trying for the past 2 years." Ethan's voice was flat. "Mrs. Winterton was Sarah's mother's best friend, and she seems to think that gives her some kind of claim on me. It doesn't." I see. Eliza picked up her mending again, trying to appear unaffected. Do you? Ethan studied her. Because you need to understand something, Mrs. Moore. This week you're here, people are going to talk. They're going to make assumptions about why I've taken in a widow with a baby. Some of those assumptions won't be kind. Eliza's hand stilled on the fabric. She understood what he was saying, that her presence here could be seen as scandalous, that her reputation, what little she had left, could be further damaged. But what choice did she have? I understand, Mr. Cole. If you'd prefer I leave, that's not what I'm saying. Ethan's voice was firm. I'm saying you should be prepared. This ranch is isolated, but news travels. By tomorrow, everyone in 3 counties will know there's a woman living here. Some will think I'm being charitable. Others will think... He didn't finish the sentence. I understand, Eliza repeated, and I'm prepared to endure whatever gossip comes. I've endured worse. Something flickered in Ethan's eyes, curiosity perhaps, or recognition, but he didn't press her for details. Instead, he simply nodded. Good. Then we understand each other. Now, where's Lucy? She disappeared when the Wintertons arrived. Ethan's jaw tightened. She does that. Charlotte makes her uncomfortable. I noticed. They stood there for a moment in uncomfortable silence, until Thomas began to fuss and Eliza automatically began to rock him. Ethan's gaze dropped to the baby, and his expression softened infinitesimally. He looks healthy. He is, thanks to your milk. Eliza hesitated, then added, I want you to know I'm grateful for the chance you're giving us. Don't be grateful yet. The week's not over. But there was less edge in his voice now. I'll be in for supper in an hour. He left, and Eliza watched him cross the yard toward the barn, his tall form moving with tired purpose. Then she turned back to her mending, her mind working through everything that had just happened, everything she'd learned. This was going to be more complicated than she'd anticipated. But then again, when had anything in her life ever been simple? The days that followed fell into a rhythm that surprised Eliza with its naturalness. She rose before dawn each morning, fed Thomas, and had breakfast ready by the time Ethan came in from the early chores. He never said much, just nodded his thanks and ate quickly before heading back out. But she noticed he'd started pausing sometimes, his coffee cup halfway to his lips, as if he'd forgotten what it was like to have hot food waiting and someone to share the morning silence with. Lucy was her constant shadow. The girl followed Eliza from room to room, helping where she could, watching Thomas with devoted fascination when she couldn't. She spoke more now than she had that first day, though still in those quiet, measured tones that suggested she'd grown used to not being heard. But Eliza heard her. She listened to every word, every observation, every small piece of information Lucy offered about the ranch, about her father, about the mother she'd lost. Mama used to sing while she worked, Lucy said on the third morning, watching Eliza knead bread dough at the kitchen table. She said it made the work go faster. Did she? Eliza glanced at the girl, noting the wistful expression. What did she sing? Old songs. I don't remember all the words. Lucy traced patterns on the table with one finger. Papa doesn't like music anymore. Eliza filed that information away with all the other small details she'd been gathering about Ethan Cole. He was a man who'd locked parts of himself away after his wife's death, who functioned but didn't live, who provided for his daughter's physical needs while somehow missing the deeper ones. It wasn't her place to judge him for it. Grief did strange things to people. She knew that better than most, but it made her heart ache for Lucy, who'd lost both parents in a way, one to death and one to sorrow. By the fourth day, the house had been transformed. Every surface gleamed, every window sparkled, every piece of fabric had been washed and mended and put in its proper place. Eliza had found flowers growing wild near the creek and brought them inside, arranging them in jars on the windowsills. It was a small touch, but it softened the austere functionality of the space, made it feel less like a place where people simply existed and more like somewhere they might actually live. Ethan noticed. She saw him pause in the doorway that evening, his eyes moving around the kitchen, taking in the changes. He didn't comment, but something in his expression shifted, some of the hardness easing for just a moment before he caught himself and looked away. The ranch hands noticed too. There were 3 of them, weathered men who kept to themselves mostly, eating the lunches Eliza prepared and leaving their dishes in the designated spot without much conversation. But she'd caught them exchanging glances, seen the way they watched her when they thought she wasn't looking. Not with hostility exactly, but with a kind of wary curiosity, as if they were trying to figure out what she was doing here and how long she'd last. On the fifth morning, Eliza was hanging wash when she heard the sound of horses approaching at speed. Multiple riders, moving fast. Her hand stilled on the clothesline, and that old familiar fear spiked through her chest. She turned slowly, forcing herself to breathe, to appear calm even as her mind raced through possibilities. 4 horses came into view, their riders dressed in the kind of clothes that marked them as townspeople rather than ranchers. 3 men and a woman, all looking around the property with the same assessing gaze that made Eliza's skin crawl. The woman was younger than Mrs. Winterton, but cut from similar cloth, well-dressed, well-groomed, carrying herself with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about where her next meal was coming from. "Good morning," the woman called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "Is Mr. Cole available?" Eliza dried her hands on her apron, walking slowly toward the visitors. Lucy had appeared on the porch, and Eliza could feel the girl's tension even from a distance. "He's working, ma'am. Can I help you?" "And you are?" One of the men spoke this time, his tone hovering somewhere between curious and condescending. "The housekeeper." "Ah, yes, we'd heard rumors." The woman's smile was sharp. "I'm Mrs. Patricia Hendricks, and these are my brothers, Thomas, James, and Robert Hendricks. We own the feed store in town, among other properties. We like to know our neighbors." The unspoken message was clear. They liked to know about their neighbors, liked to gather information and assess whether newcomers were suitable or suspicious. Eliza had encountered people like this before, people who wore their respectability like armor and wielded it like a weapon. "I'm Eliza Moore." "Mrs. Moore." Patricia's eyes dropped to Eliza's left hand, noting the absence of a ring. "You're a widow, I understand?" "Yes, ma'am." "How convenient that Mr. Cole should need a housekeeper just when you needed employment." Patricia's tone suggested she found it anything but convenient. "Tell me, Mrs. Moore, where did you work before coming here?" Eliza felt the trap in the question. Any answer would be checked, verified, used to either confirm or condemn her. "I wasn't working, ma'am. I was caring for my husband and then my son." "And before marriage?" "I lived with my family." "Where?" "Pennsylvania." "Pittsburgh?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "My, that is a long way to travel. However did you end up in Kansas?" Each question was a needle, poking and prodding, trying to find the weak spots in her story. Eliza kept her expression neutral, her voice steady. "My husband wanted to go west. We came together." "And he died how quickly after arriving?" 6 months, ma'am." "Leaving you alone with a baby in a strange place. How tragic." Patricia's voice dripped with false sympathy that barely masked her suspicion. "And no family or friends to help you?" "No, ma'am." "Most unfortunate." Patricia exchanged glances with her brothers, some silent communication passing between them. "Well, Mrs. Moore, we simply wanted to welcome you to our community and let you know that we take a keen interest in the welfare of our residents. If you should need anything, guidance, advice, assistance, please don't hesitate to visit us in town." The message beneath the words was unmistakable. "We're watching you. Step out of line and we'll know." Eliza nodded politely, saying nothing, and the Hendricks siblings eventually rode away, Patricia casting one last assessing look over her shoulder. When they were gone, Lucy came down from the porch, her small face pinched with worry. "They don't like you." "They don't know me," Eliza corrected gently, though Lucy's assessment was accurate. "They're just being careful." "They think you're bad. I heard them talking in town once about another lady who came here. They said she was immoral." Lucy stumbled slightly over the unfamiliar word. "What does immoral mean?" Eliza's stomach tightened. She knelt down so she was eye level with the girl, choosing her words carefully. "It means they thought she wasn't following the rules they think everyone should follow. But Lucy, sometimes people judge others without really knowing them. Sometimes they decide someone is bad just because that person is different or doesn't fit into the neat little boxes they've made." "Are you different?" "Yes," Eliza said honestly. "I suppose I am." Good. Lucy's voice was fierce, surprising in its intensity. I like different. Different is better than all those ladies who come here and pretend to care about me, but really just want to marry Papa. The loyalty in that statement warmed something in Eliza's chest that had been cold for a very long time. She reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Lucy's ear. Thank you, sweetheart. That means more to me than you know. That evening, Ethan came in later than usual, his face drawn with exhaustion. Eliza had kept his dinner warm, and she set it in front of him without comment, pouring him coffee and then retreating to give him space. But he stopped her with a question. I heard the Hendricks came by today. Word traveled fast, apparently. Eliza turned back to face him. Yes, sir. They introduced themselves. What did they want? To assess whether I'm respectable, I imagine. Eliza kept her tone neutral. They asked questions about my background, my husband, how I came to be here. Ethan's jaw tightened. What did you tell them? The truth. That I'm a widow, that I needed work, that you needed help. And they didn't like that answer. No, sir. I don't believe they did. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his untouched food. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Patricia Hendricks has made it her mission to know everyone's business in this county. She considers herself the guardian of community morals, which really just means she enjoys judging people and spreading gossip. She and her brothers control a lot of the commerce in town, which gives them more power than they should have. I understand. Do you? Ethan looked up at her, his gray eyes searching her face. Because if you stay past this week, Mrs. Moore, you'll be dealing with people like the Hendricks for as long as you're here. They'll watch you, talk about you, make assumptions. It won't be easy. Eliza met his gaze steadily. I didn't come here expecting easy, Mr. Cole. I came here expecting to work hard and keep my son alive. Everything else is just noise. Something that might have been respect flickered in Ethan's expression. He nodded slowly, then finally picked up his fork and began to eat. Eliza turned back to the dishes, but she could feel his eyes on her back, thoughtful and assessing in a way that was different from the others. He wasn't trying to find her faults or confirm his suspicions. He was simply trying to understand who she was and whether she could weather the storms that were surely coming. The sixth day dawned hot and still, the kind of oppressive heat that made even breathing feel like work. Eliza was in the kitchen before sunrise, trying to get the bread baked before the temperature became unbearable. Lucy appeared early too, drawn perhaps by some instinct that told her today was important. Only one more day before Ethan would make his decision about whether Eliza could stay. They worked together in comfortable silence, Lucy setting the table while Eliza finished preparing breakfast. Thomas was content in his cradle, entertaining himself with the play of light and shadow on the ceiling. Everything felt suspended, waiting, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Ethan came in precisely at his usual time, but today he wasn't alone. Behind him came two women Eliza hadn't seen before, one middle-aged and practical-looking in a simple calico dress, the other younger and prettier, with carefully styled hair and a dress that was too fancy for a ranch call. Mrs. Moore, Ethan said, his voice carefully neutral, this is Mrs. Sarah Harrison and her daughter, Miss Elizabeth Harrison. They're neighbors from the next ranch over. Ladies, this is Mrs. Eliza Moore, my housekeeper. The way he emphasized the word housekeeper was deliberate, establishing her position clearly. Eliza nodded politely, noting the way Elizabeth's eyes swept over her with barely concealed disdain, while Mrs. Harrison's gaze was more thoughtful, assessing without being obviously rude. How do you do? Mrs. Harrison said, her voice pleasant but reserved. We thought we'd stop by and welcome you properly. It's rare that we get new neighbors, and we like to extend our hospitality to newcomers. That's very kind of you, Eliza replied, aware that this was another test, another evaluation. Would you like some coffee? That would be lovely, thank you. Eliza poured coffee for everyone while Elizabeth positioned herself near Ethan, her body language making her intentions abundantly clear. Mr. Cole, I was hoping to catch you today. There's a social gathering in town next Saturday, and Mother and I would be delighted if you and Lucy would attend. It's been so long since we've seen you at any community events. I don't do social gatherings, Miss Harrison. You know that. But Lucy should have opportunities to socialize with other children her age, Elizabeth pressed, her voice taking on a slightly wheedling tone that made Eliza's teeth ache. "She's become so isolated out here. It's not healthy for a child." Lucy, who'd been watching this exchange from her position near Eliza, spoke up suddenly. "I'm not isolated. I have Mrs. Moore and Thomas." Elizabeth's smile tightened. "Of course, dear, but Mrs. Moore is staff, not family. You need proper companions, children from good families who can—" "Lucy has everything she needs." Ethan's voice cut across Elizabeth's like a knife. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "And I'll thank you not to tell me how to raise my daughter." Mrs. Harrison stood quickly, clearly recognizing the warning signs. "We should be going, Elizabeth. Thank you for the coffee, Miss Moore. Mr. Cole, we'll see ourselves out." But Elizabeth lingered, her eyes moving between Ethan and Eliza with undisguised calculation. "I do hope we'll see more of you, Mr. Cole. And Mrs. Moore, if you find yourself needing guidance on how things are done in our community, do feel free to call on me. I'd be happy to help you understand the expectations." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eliza simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak without saying something that would make the situation worse. The Harrisons finally left, and the silence they left behind was heavy and uncomfortable. "Papa," Lucy said quietly, "I don't like her." "I know, sweetheart. She was mean to Mrs. Moore." "I know that too." Ethan rubbed his face tiredly, suddenly looking every one of his 30-some years. "This is what I was warning you about, Mrs. Moore. They'll keep coming, keep testing, keep trying to establish some kind of hierarchy where you're at the bottom. Can you handle that?" Eliza thought about Pittsburgh, about the life she'd left behind, about the things she'd endured that made these social pretensions seem almost laughably insignificant. "I can handle it, Mr. Cole. The question is whether you can handle having a housekeeper who makes your neighbors uncomfortable." The bluntness of her statement seemed to surprise him. He studied her for a long moment. Then a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "I think I can manage. The question is whether I'm getting my money's worth from you." "You're not paying me money." "Even better reason to ensure I'm getting value." But there was no bite in his words, almost a teasing quality that transformed his entire face. "The week's almost up, Mrs. Moore. What do you think? Are you worth keeping?" Eliza looked around the kitchen, clean and organized and somehow warmer than it had been when she arrived. She thought about Lucy trailing after her with increasing confidence, about Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle instead of crying from hunger, about the small ways this house had changed in 6 days. "I think that's for you to decide, Mr. Cole." Diplomatic answer. Ethan drained his coffee cup and stood. "I'll give you my decision tomorrow morning. Until then, carry on as you have been." He left, and Lucy immediately rushed to Eliza's side, her small face anxious. "He's going to let you stay. I know he is." "We'll see, sweetheart." Eliza smoothed the girl's tangled hair, making a mental note to properly brush and braid it later. "Why don't you help me with the washing today?" They spent the day working together, and Eliza tried not to think about tomorrow, about what she'd do if Ethan said no, about where she and Thomas would go. She had no backup plan, no contingency, nothing but hope, and the desperate prayer that she'd done enough to prove her worth. That evening, after Lucy had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Eliza sat in her small room with Thomas nursing at her breast and allowed herself to acknowledge the fear that had been building all day. Tomorrow would determine everything. Tomorrow, Ethan Cole would decide whether she was respectable enough, useful enough, valuable enough to keep around. And if he said no, but she couldn't think about that. Wouldn't think about that. She'd faced worse than this and survived. She'd face whatever came next with her head high and her dignity intact, because that was all she had left. The 7th morning arrived with clouds building on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. Eliza rose even earlier than usual, driven by nervous energy she couldn't contain. She prepared an elaborate breakfast, eggs and bacon, fresh biscuits, gravy, fried potatoes, putting all her skill into the meal, as if the quality of the food might somehow influence Ethan's decision. Lucy appeared just as Eliza was setting everything on the table, her eyes immediately finding Eliza's face and reading the anxiety there. "He'll say yes," the girl whispered fiercely. "He has to." But when Ethan came in, his expression was unreadable. He sat down, surveyed the spread before him, and began to eat methodically without saying anything. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating, until Eliza thought she might scream just to break it. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Ethan set down his fork and looked directly at her. "Sit down, Mrs. Moore." "Mrs." Eliza's heart hammered as she obeyed, taking the chair across from him. Lucy had frozen in place near the stove, her eyes wide and fixed on her father's face. "I've given your situation considerable thought," Ethan began, his tone formal and businesslike. "This week has been instructive. You're a good worker, probably the best housekeeper I could hope to find. Lucy has taken to you in a way she hasn't with anyone since her mother died. The house runs more smoothly than it has in 2 years. He paused, and Eliza held her breath, waiting for the but that was surely coming. "However," Ethan continued, and there it was, "keeping you on permanently is going to cause problems. You've already seen how people react to your presence here. The gossip will get worse, not better. People will make assumptions, say things that aren't true, possibly even take actions that could affect your reputation, and by extension, my business relationships." Eliza felt her hopes crumbling, but forced herself to keep her expression neutral. "I understand, Mr. Cole." "I'm not finished." Ethan's voice was firm. "I was going to say that despite all those concerns, I'm willing to offer you permanent employment here, not just for a week or a month, but for as long as you're willing to stay, and the arrangement works for both of us. You'll have your room, your board, milk for Thomas, and a small wage besides. In exchange, you'll continue doing what you've been doing, keeping the house, preparing meals, helping with Lucy when needed." The reversal was so sudden that Eliza couldn't process it for a moment. She stared at him, certain she'd misheard. You're saying I can stay?" "That's what I'm saying. Assuming you're willing to deal with everything that comes with it, the gossip, the judgment, the women like the Hendricks and the Harrisons who will try to make your life difficult." "I'm willing." The words burst out of Eliza before she could even think about them. "I'm absolutely willing. Thank you, Mr. Cole. You won't regret this. I promise I'll work harder than—" "You already work plenty hard," Ethan interrupted, and that small smile appeared again. "Just keep doing what you're doing. That's all I ask." Lucy let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and launched herself at Eliza, wrapping thin arms around her waist and burying her face against Eliza's side. "You're staying. You're really staying." Eliza's own eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She held Lucy close with one arm while looking at Ethan across the table. "Thank you," she said again, her voice thick with emotion. "You don't know what this means to us." "I think I have some idea." Ethan stood, his expression softening as he looked at his daughter clinging to Eliza. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. And Mrs. Moore, welcome to Redfield Ranch. Officially." He left, and Eliza finally let the tears come, quiet and grateful, while Lucy held on to her as if she might disappear if the girl let go. Thomas chose that moment to wake and cry, and somehow that broke the tension, turned the tears to laughter as Eliza tended to him while Lucy danced around the kitchen, her joy infectious and pure. They had a home. After months of uncertainty, of fear, of constantly looking over her shoulder and wondering where the next meal would come from, Eliza finally had a place where she and Thomas could stay. It wasn't perfect. She knew the challenges ahead would be significant, that people would talk and judge and try to drive her away. But for now, in this moment, she let herself feel the overwhelming relief of having somewhere safe to be. The rest of that day passed in a blur of work and quiet celebration. The promised storm rolled in late in the afternoon, bringing with it a wall of rain that turned the world gray and liquid. Eliza watched it through the kitchen window while preparing supper, marveling at the violence of prairie weather, so different from the storm she'd known back east. Lucy was upstairs, supposedly organizing her room, but more likely playing with the rag doll Eliza had repaired for her. Thomas was napping, and the house was peaceful in the way that only a house can be during a rainstorm, sealed off from the world, warm and dry while chaos raged outside. Eliza was so absorbed in her thoughts that she didn't hear Ethan come in until he spoke. "Storm's getting worse." She turned to find him standing in the doorway, dripping wet despite having clearly made a run from the barn to the house. His hair was plastered to his head, and water pooled around his boots on the floor she'd so carefully cleaned. "You're soaked," she said, reaching for a towel from the stack by the wash basin. "Here." He took it with a nod of thanks, drying his face and hair with efficient movements. "Wind's picking up. I wanted to make sure all the animals were secured before it gets too bad." "Is it going to be bad?" "Could be. These summer storms can turn violent fast out here." Ethan glanced toward the stairs. "Where's Lucy?" "In her room. Should I get her?" "Not yet. She gets frightened during bad storms. Has ever since—" He stopped abruptly, but Eliza could fill in the blank. Ever since her mother died. She wondered if Sarah had died during a storm, if that's what had created the association in Lucy's young mind. Thunder crashed overhead, close enough to shake the windows, and Eliza jumped despite herself. Ethan noticed, his eyes sharpening. "You're not fond of storms either?" "I'm fine with rain. It's the thunder that gets me." Eliza tried to smile, to make light of it, but another crack of thunder made her flinch again. "Come away from the window," Ethan said, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. "The center of the house is safest if things turn really bad." Eliza obeyed, moving to the table and busying herself with needless adjustments to the place settings. The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the walls like fists demanding entry. She thought of Thomas sleeping in his cradle and had to physically restrain herself from rushing to check on him for the 10th time. "Mrs. Moore," Ethan's voice cut through her spiraling anxiety. "Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it snapped her attention to him immediately. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, not pity, but something close to understanding. "The house is solid. It's weathered worse than this. You're safe here." Safe. Such a simple word, but Eliza couldn't remember the last time she'd truly felt it. Even now, with walls around her and a roof over her head, and Ethan Cole standing there like an immovable pillar, part of her waited for disaster to strike, for everything to fall apart the way things always did. "Papa!" Lucy's voice rang out from upstairs, high and frightened. Both adults moved at once, but Ethan was faster, taking the stairs 2 at a time. Eliza followed, finding them in Lucy's room. The girl wrapped in her father's arms, her face buried against his chest while he murmured soothing words. "It's all right, sweetheart. Just noise. Just weather. Nothing's going to hurt you." But Lucy was beyond hearing him, lost in whatever memory or fear had been triggered by the storm. Her whole body shook, and the sound of her sobbing broke Eliza's heart. Without thinking, she moved forward and knelt beside them, placing a gentle hand on Lucy's back. "Lucy," she said softly, "can you hear me?" The girl's sobbing hitched, and she turned her head slightly, enough to see Eliza through her tears. "I need you to listen to my voice, sweetheart. Just my voice. Can you do that?" A tiny nod. "Good. Now, I want you to breathe with me in—" Eliza drew in a deep, exaggerated breath. And out." She released it slowly. "Can you try?" Lucy's breathing was ragged, but she attempted to match Eliza's rhythm. In and out, in and out. Slowly, gradually, the girl's panic began to ease. Ethan watched this exchange in silence, his arms still holding his daughter, but his eyes fixed on Eliza's face with something like wonder. After several minutes, Lucy's breathing had calmed to occasional hiccups. She pulled back from her father slightly, her face blotchy and wet. "I'm sorry, Papa." "Don't apologize, Lucy. You've got nothing to be sorry for." Ethan's voice was rough with emotion. "But I'm being a baby. I'm 8 years old. I shouldn't be scared of storms." "Everyone's scared of something," Eliza said gently. "Being scared doesn't make you a baby. It makes you human." "Are you scared of storms?" "Terrified," Eliza admitted. "Thunder especially. Makes me jump every time." "Really?" Lucy looked genuinely surprised. "Really? But you know what helps? Having people around. Being with others who can be brave when you're scared. Your papa is very brave, isn't he?" Lucy nodded, glancing up at her father with adoration. "And I think you're brave too," Eliza continued, "because even though you're scared, you're sitting here talking to us instead of hiding under the covers. That takes courage." Something in Lucy's expression shifted, a tiny spark of pride breaking through the fear. She leaned against Eliza, and Eliza wrapped an arm around her, the three of them forming a small circle of warmth and safety while the storm raged outside. They stayed like that for a while, until Lucy's eyes began to droop with exhaustion. Ethan carried her to bed, tucking her in carefully, and Eliza followed, sitting on the edge of the mattress until the girl's breathing evened out in sleep. In the hallway outside Lucy's room, Ethan stopped Eliza with a hand on her arm. "Thank you for that. She's never responded to anyone like that when she's scared. She just needed someone who understood," Eliza said simply. "You can't logic away fear. You can only breathe through it." "How did you know to do that? The breathing?" Eliza hesitated, then decided honesty was warranted. "I've had my share of panic. I learned what works." Ethan studied her face in the dim light of the hallway. "You've been through something bad." It wasn't a question, and Eliza didn't treat it as one. "Haven't we all, Mr. Cole?" "Ethan," he said quietly, "if you're going to live here, work here, help raise my daughter, you should call me Ethan." It felt like a threshold being crossed, some invisible line between employer and employee being blurred into something more complicated. Eliza nodded slowly. "Ethan, then. And you should check on Thomas. I left him sleeping, but with this storm—" They went downstairs together, and Eliza found Thomas still peacefully asleep despite the thunder and lightning. She stood watching him, one hand on the cradle's edge, while Ethan checked the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure against the worsening weather. The storm finally began to subside near midnight, the rain slowing to a steady patter and the thunder moving off into the distance. Eliza had dozed off in the chair beside Thomas's cradle, exhausted from the emotional intensity of the day, and she woke to find a blanket draped over her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Ethan must have covered her. The thought brought an unexpected warmth, a sense of being cared for that she'd been without for so long. She pulled the blanket closer and let herself drift back to sleep, feeling safer than she had in years. The weeks that followed the storm settled into something that felt almost like normalcy, though Eliza had learned long ago not to trust the appearance of peace. She rose each morning before the sun painted the horizon pink, moving through the quiet house with Thomas strapped to her chest, preparing breakfast and starting the day's work before the heat became oppressive. Lucy was always close behind her, sometimes helping, sometimes just present, her small shadow a constant reminder of how much had changed in such a short time. Ethan had grown more comfortable around her, speaking more freely, occasionally even joking in his dry way that always seemed to catch Eliza off guard. She'd learned his rhythms, the way he took his coffee, the foods he preferred, the subtle signs that told her whether his day had been difficult or merely exhausting. It was a strange kind of intimacy, born not of romance but of proximity and shared purpose. The town visitors had continued, though less frequently now that word had spread about Eliza's permanent position. The Hendricks siblings had stopped by once more, Patricia's sharp eyes cataloging every detail of the household, while her brothers asked pointed questions about Ethan's business that he deflected with practiced ease. Elizabeth Harrison had appeared twice, each time more elaborately dressed than the last, each time more obviously frustrated by Ethan's polite but firm disinterest. It was late August when everything changed, though it started with something as simple as Thomas waking in the middle of the night. Eliza heard him fussing and rose immediately, stumbling slightly in the darkness of her small room. She lit the lamp with trembling fingers still half asleep and reached for her son. The moment her hands touched him, she knew something was wrong. His skin burned beneath her fingers, fever-hot and dry, and his crying had a quality to it she'd never heard before, thin and weak and somehow wrong. "No," she whispered, lifting him from the cradle with shaking hands. "No, no, no, please, not this." Thomas's little body felt like it was on fire. His eyes were glassy, unfocused, and when she tried to nurse him, he turned his head away, too weak or too sick to latch on. Panic rose in Eliza's throat, bitter and choking. She'd seen fever before, had watched it take her husband with terrifying speed, and the thought of losing Thomas the same way made her vision blur with tears. She stumbled out of her room into the kitchen, moving on instinct toward the water pump. Cool water. She needed cool water to bring down the fever. Her hands shook so badly she could barely work the pump handle, and when water finally gushed forth, she soaked a cloth and began wiping Thomas's face, his neck, his tiny arms. "Come on, baby," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Come on, you have to fight this. Please fight this." But Thomas only whimpered, his breathing growing more labored with each passing moment. His chest rose and fell too quickly, small ribs visible beneath his thin nightshirt, and suddenly he was struggling, gasping, fighting for air that wouldn't come. Eliza screamed. She didn't mean to, didn't even realize she was doing it until she heard her own voice echoing through the house, raw and terrified. "Help! Someone help me, please!" Footsteps thundered down the stairs, and then Ethan was there, wearing only his trousers and an undershirt, his hair wild from sleep. His eyes found Thomas immediately, and something in his expression went cold and focused in a way that cut through Eliza's panic like a knife. "What happened?" "Fever. He woke with a fever, and now he can't breathe. I don't know what's wrong. I don't know how to help him." The words tumbled out in a rush, incoherent with fear. Ethan moved to her side, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he took Thomas from her arms. He held the baby up to the light, examining him with the practiced eye of someone who dealt with sick animals, sick children, sick everything that life on a ranch could throw at you. "How long has he been like this?" "Just now, just minutes ago. He was fine when I put him down. I swear he was fine." "I believe you. Fever can come on fast in babies." Ethan's voice was steady, calm in a way that gave Eliza something to anchor herself to. "Lucy. Lucy. Get down here." The girl appeared moments later, her face pale with sleep and worry. "Papa?" "I need you to run to the bunkhouse and wake Jackson. Tell him to ride to town for the doctor as fast as he can. Tell him it's an emergency. Can you do that?" Lucy nodded and disappeared, her bare feet pattering across the floor and out into the night. Ethan turned back to Eliza, still holding Thomas, whose breathing had become even more ragged and shallow. "Get me more cold water and whiskey if we have any." Eliza's hands were still shaking, but she obeyed, moving on autopilot while her mind screamed that this couldn't be happening, that she couldn't lose Thomas, that he was all she had left in the world. She brought the water and found a bottle of whiskey in the back of the pantry, setting both on the table where Ethan had laid Thomas on a clean cloth. "What are you going to do?" Her voice came out high and thin, barely recognizable as her own. "Try to break the fever. Keep him breathing." Ethan soaked another cloth in the cold water and began wiping down Thomas's body with methodical precision. "Talk to me, Eliza. Keep talking. Tell me about his day. What was he like earlier?" The use of her first name, the command to speak, gave her something to focus on besides the terror threatening to consume her. "He was fine. Happy. He smiled at Lucy during supper. He nursed well before bed. There was no sign of anything wrong. Sometimes there isn't. Babies can turn sick faster than you'd think possible." Ethan's hands never stopped moving, cooling Thomas's burning skin, checking his breathing, feeling the pulse in his tiny neck. "How's his color?" Eliza forced herself to look, really look, at her son. His face was flushed, but his lips were taking on a slightly blue tinge that made her stomach drop. His lips looked blue. Damn. Ethan picked Thomas up again, holding him upright against his chest. "Come here. Put your hand on his back, right here. Feel that." Eliza pressed her palm against Thomas's tiny back and felt the rattling, the wet sound of fluid in lungs too small to fight it. "What is that?" "Fluid. Probably pneumonia setting in. We need to keep him upright, keep the fluid from settling." Ethan met her eyes, and she saw worry there despite his calm demeanor. "This is going to be a long night, Eliza. I need you to stay with me. Can you do that?" She wanted to fall apart, wanted to scream and cry and rage against the unfairness of a world that would threaten her baby after everything else it had already taken from her. But Thomas needed her strong, needed her present, so she swallowed her fear and nodded. "Yes. Tell me what to do." "Hold him like this." Ethan carefully transferred Thomas back to her arms, positioning him so his head was elevated, his back supported. "Keep him upright. I'm going to make a steam tent. It might help loosen whatever's in his lungs." He moved with purpose, boiling water on the stove, draping a cloth over a chair to create a small, enclosed space. When the water was steaming, he had Eliza sit with Thomas inside the makeshift tent, the hot vapor surrounding them. At first, Thomas's breathing seemed to ease slightly, but then he started coughing, small body convulsing with the effort, and when Eliza looked down, she saw blood flecking his lips. "Ethan!" The terror was back, full force. "He's coughing blood!" Ethan was beside her in an instant, taking Thomas again, examining the blood with fingers that remained steady, even as his jaw clenched. "It's from his throat, from the coughing, not his lungs. It's better than it could be." But Thomas was growing weaker, his cries fading to whimpers, his eyes rolling back in his head. Eliza watched her son slipping away and felt something break inside her chest, some last desperate part of her that had been holding on to hope. "No, please, no! Don't take him from me! He's all I have, please!" "Eliza!" Ethan's voice cut through her spiral, sharp and commanding. "Look at me!" She dragged her eyes away from Thomas to meet Ethan's steady gray gaze. "He's not gone yet. He's still fighting. We're still fighting. Don't give up on him now." The words were like a slap, shocking her back into the present moment. She took a shuddering breath, then another, forcing herself to focus. "What else can we do?" "Keep him warm, but not too warm. Keep his head elevated. Try to get water into him if he'll take it. And wait." Ethan's expression was grim. Wait for the doctor and pray the fever breaks before the infection gets worse. They settled into a rhythm then, the two of them working in tandem through the darkest hours of the night. Eliza held Thomas while Ethan prepared cool compresses and warm broths, attempting to coax drops of liquid between the baby's cracked lips. Lucy appeared at some point, having returned from waking the ranch hand, and positioned herself in the corner of the kitchen, watching with wide, frightened eyes. "Is Thomas going to die?" she asked in a small voice. "No," Eliza said fiercely before Ethan could respond with something more measured. "No, he's not. He's going to be fine." Lucy came closer, reaching out to touch Thomas's hand with one finger. "He's so hot." "I know, sweetheart. When Mama got sick, she got hot too, and then she—" Lucy's voice trailed off, but they all knew how that sentence ended. Ethan's expression tightened with old pain, but he kept his voice gentle. "Lucy, this is different. Thomas is strong, and we caught it early. Why don't you go get some rest? There's nothing you can do here. I want to stay, in case he needs me." No one argued with her. Lucy curled up in a chair near the stove, her eyes fixed on Thomas with an intensity that spoke of old trauma being relived. Eliza wanted to comfort her, wanted to say something reassuring, but she had no comfort to give. All her attention was focused on her son, on the shallow rise and fall of his chest, on the terrible heat emanating from his small body. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. The whiskey Ethan had mentioned was used to cool Thomas's skin, the sharp scent of it mixing with the steam from the tent and the metallic smell of blood from his coughing. Outside, false dawn began to lighten the sky, but there was no sign of Jackson returning with the doctor. "Where is he?" Eliza asked, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "He should be back by now. Town's a good hour ride, even at full speed. Doctor has to get his bag, saddle his horse. It takes time." But Ethan's eyes kept drifting to the window, and Eliza could see the same worry she felt reflected in his face. Thomas's breathing had gotten worse, each breath a wet rattle that made Eliza's stomach churn. His fever showed no signs of breaking, and he'd stopped responding entirely to their attempts to rouse him. He lay limp in Eliza's arms, his small face waxy and gray, and she could feel him slipping away despite everything they were doing. "Come on, baby," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Come on, stay with me. Please stay with me." Lucy had fallen into a restless sleep in her chair, her face streaked with dried tears. Ethan sat across from Eliza, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white. They'd run out of things to do, run out of ways to fight. Now they could only wait and hope that help arrived in time. "Eliza," Ethan said quietly, his voice rough with exhaustion, If the worst happens, you need to know it's not your fault. Babies get sick. Sometimes they don't make it. It's not—" "Don't." Eliza's voice cracked. "Don't say it. Don't even think it. He's going to be fine. He has to be fine. I just want you to know that I won't blame you. You've done everything right. You've been a good mother." The kindness in those words, the understanding, broke something in Eliza that had been holding tight for too long. Tears spilled down her cheeks, hot and bitter. He's all I have left. My husband is gone, my family disowned me, everything I had is gone. Thomas is all that's left. If he dies, I have nothing. That's not true. Ethan's voice was firm. You have a place here, a home. Lucy needs you, and he paused, seeming to struggle with the words. And I need you. Not just as a housekeeper. You've brought something back to this house that's been missing for 2 years. You've made Lucy smile again. You've made me remember what it's like to live instead of just survive. Eliza stared at him through her tears, unable to process what he was saying, unable to think about anything except the dying child in her arms. But some part of her heard the words, filed them away for later, when she might be able to examine what they meant. The sound of hoofbeats outside broke the moment. Ethan was on his feet instantly, moving to the door and flinging it open. Jackson was there, mud splattered and breathing hard, and beside him was an older man with a black bag. The doctor finally arrived. "Where is he?" the doctor asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Here." Eliza held Thomas out with trembling arms. "Please help him, please." The doctor, Dr. Morrison, she learned later, took Thomas with practiced hands, carrying him to the table and laying him down in the lamplight. His examination was quick and thorough, his expression grave as he listened to Thomas's labored breathing, checked his fever, looked at the blood-flecked foam around his mouth. "Pneumonia," he confirmed grimly. "Advanced. The boy's in trouble." "Can you help him?" Eliza could barely force the words out. "I can try. But I won't lie to you, Mrs. Moore. He's very sick. The next few hours will tell us whether he's strong enough to fight it. Dr. Morrison opened his bag, pulling out bottles and instruments. "I need boiling water, clean cloths, and someone to hold him steady." They all sprang into action. Ethan boiled water while Eliza gathered every clean cloth she could find. The doctor prepared something in a small bottle, medicine, he said, though he didn't specify what kind, and managed to get drops of it between Thomas's lips. Then came the worst part, lancing the baby's tiny arm to drain what the doctor called bad humors, though Eliza suspected he was simply following old practices that might or might not help. Thomas barely reacted to the pain, too far gone to fight, and that terrified Eliza more than anything. She held his other hand, murmuring to him constantly, willing him to feel her presence, to know that she was there and wouldn't let him go without a fight. Lucy woke during the doctor's ministrations and crept to Eliza's side, slipping her small hand into Eliza's free one. They stood together, the woman and the girl, watching the doctor work, watching Thomas struggle for each breath, waiting to see if love and medicine would be enough to save him. Dawn broke fully, proper light flooding through the windows, and still Thomas's fever raged. The doctor tried everything he knew, cool compresses, herbal drafts, positioning to help drain the fluid from his lungs. Nothing seemed to make a difference. Thomas lay on the table like a broken doll, his skin ashen, his breathing so shallow it was barely visible. "Is he going to make it?" Ethan asked the question they were all thinking. Dr. Morrison's expression was carefully neutral, professionally detached. "I've done all I can. The rest is up to him the rest is up to him. The fever needs to break within the next hour or two, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. Eliza felt the world tilting, felt her knees going weak. Ethan's hand was suddenly on her elbow, steadying her, keeping her upright when she wanted to collapse. "Sit down," he said gently. "You need to conserve your strength." "I can't. I have to stay with him." "You can stay with him sitting down." Ethan guided her to a chair pulled close to the table, then positioned himself behind her, his hands on her shoulders, solid and warm and somehow anchoring. Lucy pressed against her other side, and they formed a small circle around Thomas, a fortress of will and love against the darkness trying to claim him. Time lost all meaning. The sun climbed higher in the sky, turning the kitchen golden with morning light. Ranch hands came and went, bringing reports of animals needing tending, fences needing mending, all the daily business of running a ranch. Ethan dismissed them all with curt instructions, never moving from his position behind Eliza's chair. The doctor checked Thomas periodically, his expression growing grimmer each time. Finally, he pulled Ethan aside, speaking in low tones that Eliza strained to hear. "Mr. Cole, I think you should prepare Mrs. Moore for the possibility that the boy won't survive this. His breathing is getting worse, not better. The infection is spreading faster than his small body can fight it. It might be time to say goodbye." "No." Ethan's voice was flat. "Not yet. He's still breathing. While he's breathing, we don't give up. Mr. Cole, I understand your compassion, but I said no." There was steel in Ethan's tone that brooked no argument. "We don't give up on children in this house. Not while there's still hope." The doctor sighed, but nodded, returning to his vigil by Thomas's side. Eliza heard the exchange and felt something shift in her chest, some last barrier between her and Ethan crumbling. He was fighting for Thomas as fiercely as she was, treating her son as if he mattered, as if his life had value beyond being just another statistic in a hard world. Another hour passed, then another. Thomas's breathing grew so shallow that Eliza had to lean close to hear it at all. His lips were blue, his fingernails dusky, all signs that his body was failing despite their desperate efforts. Eliza held his hand, feeling how cold it had become despite the fever, and began to say goodbye in her heart even as her lips continued to murmur encouragement. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much, baby. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. If you need to go, if it's too hard to stay, I'll understand. But please, if you can fight just a little longer." Lucy sobbed quietly against her side. Ethan's hands tightened on her shoulders. The doctor checked Thomas's pulse again and shook his head slowly, the gesture of a man who'd seen this too many times before. And then, just when Eliza had resigned herself to the worst, Thomas coughed. It was a real cough, strong and productive, and when Eliza looked down, she saw him expelling thick yellow fluid from his mouth. His eyes fluttered, opened briefly, found her face. "Mama?" he whispered, the first real word he'd ever spoken, emerging at the moment closest to death. "I'm here, baby. Mama's here." Thomas coughed again, harder this time, bringing up more of the infection that had been strangling his lungs. His breathing eased, just slightly, but it was noticeable. The blue tinge around his lips faded incrementally, and when the doctor pressed his hand to Thomas's forehead, his expression changed from grim acceptance to cautious hope. "The fever's breaking," Dr. Morrison said, wonder creeping into his professional tone. "I'll be damned. The fever's actually breaking." Eliza couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at her son as color slowly returned to his face. Thomas coughed a few more times, clearing his airways, and then, miracle of miracles, he began to cry. A real cry, strong and indignant. The cry of a baby who was sick but no longer dying. "Oh, thank heavens," Lucy breathed, squeezing Eliza's hand so hard it hurt. Ethan's hands on Eliza's shoulders trembled slightly, the only sign of how worried he'd been. "He's going to make it." "It appears so." The doctor was checking Thomas more thoroughly now, listening to his breathing, examining his color. "He's not out of danger yet. The infection is still there, and he'll need careful nursing for the next few days. But the crisis has passed. He's fighting back." Eliza finally let herself cry, deep sobs of relief that shook her entire body. She gathered Thomas into her arms, holding him close while he wailed his displeasure at being poked and prodded and generally miserable. But his cries were the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard, because they meant he was alive, he was going to survive. Lucy wrapped her arms around both of them, crying too, and Eliza felt Ethan's hand on her head, a brief touch that communicated more than words could. They'd fought together through the darkest hours, and they'd won. Thomas would live. The days following Thomas's fever were a blur of exhaustion and vigilance. Dr. Morrison had left detailed instructions and promised to return in 3 days to check on the baby's progress. But the weight of responsibility fell squarely on Eliza's shoulders. She barely slept, dozing in snatches while sitting upright with Thomas in her arms, waking at the slightest change in his breathing or the smallest whimper of discomfort. Ethan had insisted she move into one of the upstairs rooms, larger and with better ventilation than her small space off the kitchen. He'd carried Thomas's cradle up himself, along with a more comfortable chair and extra blankets, creating a proper sick room without asking permission. Lucy had taken to sleeping on a pallet on the floor beside Eliza's bed, refusing to be separated from either of them, despite gentle encouragement to return to her own room. "What if Thomas needs me?" she'd asked, her voice small but determined. "What if he gets scared and I'm not here?" Eliza hadn't had the heart to send her away, so the three of them formed their own small unit in that upstairs room, bound together by the shared trauma of nearly losing Thomas and the quiet miracle of his survival. Thomas improved slowly but steadily. The infection cleared from his lungs, his fever stayed gone, and after 5 days he was nursing again, though still weaker than before. Eliza watched him like a hawk, checking him constantly for any sign of relapse, unable to shake the terror that had taken root in her chest during those dark hours when she'd thought she'd lose him. It was during one of these checks, late on the 6th evening after the crisis, that Ethan knocked softly on her door. She'd been dozing in the chair, Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms, and Lucy was curled up on her pallet drawing pictures with the stub of a pencil Eliza had found for her. "Come in," Eliza called quietly, her voice rough from disuse. She hadn't spoken much in days, too focused on Thomas to engage in conversation. Ethan entered carrying a tray with soup, bread, and tea. He set it on the small table by the window, then turned to study her with concerned eyes. "Have you eaten today?" Eliza tried to remember and couldn't. "I had something this morning, I think." That was yesterday morning. Ethan's tone was firm, but not unkind. "Lucy told me you haven't come down at all today. You need to eat, Eliza. You can't take care of him if you collapse from starvation." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look half dead yourself." He moved closer, reaching for Thomas. "Let me hold him. You eat." Eliza's arms tightened instinctively around her son, and she saw understanding flash in Ethan's eyes. He'd seen this before, she realized, this desperate clinging, this inability to trust anyone else with something precious. He'd probably felt it himself after his wife died. "I'll sit right here," he said gently, pulling a second chair close to hers. "You can watch him the whole time, but you need to eat, and you need to use both hands to do it." The logic was sound, and Eliza was too exhausted to argue. She carefully transferred Thomas to Ethan's arms, watching as the big man cradled her tiny son with surprising gentleness. Thomas stirred but didn't wake, settling against Ethan's chest as if he belonged there. Eliza forced herself to pick up the spoon, to eat the soup that was still blessedly warm. Her stomach cramped at the first few bites, unused to food, but gradually it settled and she realized how desperately hungry she actually was. She ate everything on the tray, including the bread and half the tea, while Ethan sat holding Thomas and Lucy continued her drawing with one eye on the adults. "Better?" Ethan asked when she'd finished. "Yes, thank you." Eliza set the empty bowl aside, already reaching for Thomas again, but Ethan didn't immediately hand him over. "We need to talk about something," he said, his expression serious. "While Thomas was sick, while we were all focused on keeping him alive, something happened that you need to know about." Eliza's stomach clenched with new anxiety. "What happened?" "A man came to the ranch 3 days ago, asked for you by name, said he had business with you." The blood drained from Eliza's face. She knew, even before Ethan continued, exactly who had come looking for her. The past she'd been running from had finally caught up. "What did he look like?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Tall, well-dressed, expensive clothes, dark hair going gray, rode a fine horse, too fine for these parts, carried himself like someone used to getting what he wants." Ethan watched her carefully. "He said his name was Cornelius Ashford, and that you were his daughter-in-law." Eliza closed her eyes, feeling the walls closing in. "What did you tell him?" "I told him there was no one here by the name he was asking for. He didn't believe me, said he had information that you were working here. He got insistent, made some threats about what would happen if I was lying to him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I had Jackson and the boys escort him off the property, told him if he came back he'd regret it." "He will come back." Eliza's voice was flat with certainty. "He won't stop until he finds me." "Who is he, Eliza? What does he want with you?" Lucy had stopped drawing, her eyes wide and frightened as she looked between the adults. Eliza wanted to shield her from this, wanted to keep the ugliness of her past away from this child who'd already seen too much darkness. But there was no point in hiding anymore. If Cornelius had found her, the truth would come out eventually. He's my father-in-law, Eliza said slowly, each word feeling like broken glass in her throat. My husband's father. James was his only son, his heir. When James died, Cornelius decided that Thomas, that my son, belongs to him, that I'm unfit to raise the Ashford heir. That's ridiculous. Thomas is your son. Not according to Cornelius. He has lawyers, money, influence. He can make things very difficult for me. Eliza's hands twisted in her lap. That's why I left Pittsburgh. That's why I had nothing when I came here. I took Thomas and ran before Cornelius could file papers to take him away from me. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, still holding Thomas, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. Why would he want to take Thomas? What kind of man tries to steal a baby from its mother? A powerful man who sees Thomas as property, as the continuation of his bloodline and his fortune. James was supposed to inherit everything, the factories, the business interests, the Ashford name. When he died, all those plans died with him. Unless... Eliza forced herself to continue. Unless Thomas can be raised to take his father's place. But not with me. Never with me. Cornelius made it very clear that I'm not suitable, that I come from inferior stock, that I'll ruin the boy with my common ways. Inferior stock? Lucy spoke up indignantly. That's mean. You're not inferior to anybody. Despite everything, Eliza felt a rush of warmth at the girl's fierce defense. Thank you, sweetheart. But to people like Cornelius Ashford, I'm nothing. I was a secretary in one of his offices. That's how James and I met. Cornelius never approved of the marriage. When James got sick and died, Cornelius blamed me. Said I'd been a distraction, that the stress of dealing with someone like me had weakened James's constitution. That's not how fever works, Ethan said flatly. Your father-in-law is a fool if he believes that. He believes what's convenient for him to believe, and he has the money and power to make his beliefs into reality. Eliza finally reached out and took Thomas back, needing to feel the weight of him in her arms. I thought if I came far enough, changed my name slightly, lived quietly, he wouldn't find me. But he has people everywhere, connections in every town. I should have known I couldn't hide forever. Ethan stood, pacing to the window and looking out into the darkness beyond. What will he do now that he knows you're here? He'll come back with the law. A judge, maybe the sheriff. He'll claim I'm destitute, unstable, unfit. He'll say Thomas would be better off with him, with his wealth and his respectability and his fine house. And the law will probably agree with him because that's how the world works. Rich men get what they want. Not in Kansas, they don't. Ethan turned back to face her, his expression hard. This isn't Pennsylvania. Out here, a man's words still mean something, and a mother's rights mean something too. He can bring all the lawyers he wants, doesn't mean he'll win. You don't understand how powerful he is. And he doesn't understand how stubborn I am. Ethan moved closer, his presence somehow reassuring despite her fear. You're not facing this alone, Eliza. You're part of this household now. Thomas is... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Thomas is a child I helped save. Lucy loves him. I'll be damned if I let some Eastern dandy with money come out here and take him away just because he thinks he's entitled to. He could make trouble for you too. He could... Let him try. There was steel in Ethan's voice. I've dealt with men who thought their money or their connections made them invincible. They learned otherwise. Your father-in-law will too, if he's foolish enough to push this. Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself hope that Ethan's protection would be enough, but she'd seen what Cornelius could do, had watched him destroy people who got in his way with casual ruthlessness. He'll use whatever ammunition he can find against me. The fact that I'm living here, unmarried, working for you, he'll twist that into something sordid. He'll make it sound like I'm living in sin, corrupting his grandson with my immoral behavior. Then we'll deal with that too. How? How do you deal with accusations like that? Even if they're not true, once people start talking, once the gossip spreads, Eliza. Ethan crouched down beside her chair so they were eye level. Listen to me. I don't care what Cornelius Ashford says about you or me or this household. I know the truth. Lucy knows the truth. Anyone who matters knows the truth. And if push comes to shove, if he tries to take Thomas using lies and slander, then we'll find a way to make sure those lies don't stick. What way? What can we possibly do against someone like him? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching her face. When he spoke, his voice was low but certain. We make sure there's no ammunition to use. We make sure there's no question about your respectability or your situation. I don't understand. We get married. The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible and absurd and somehow inevitable all at once. Eliza stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? We get married, Ethan repeated calmly, as if he were suggesting they plant a different crop next season instead of proposing a marriage of convenience. Tomorrow, if possible. We make it legal and proper. Then when Ashford comes back with his lawyers and his accusations, he'll find a stable household, a married couple raising children together. No scandal, no impropriety, nothing he can use against you. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Ethan, you can't just marry someone to help them win a legal battle. That's insane. Is it? He tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. I need a wife. Lucy needs a mother. Thomas needs a father. You need protection and security. Seems to me this solves several problems at once. But you don't... We barely know each other. You don't love me. The words caught in Eliza's throat. You loved your wife. You can't just replace her with someone convenient. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Pain, memory, something deeper than surface emotion. No one could replace Sarah. I'm not trying to. But she's been gone 2 years, Eliza. 2 years of this house being empty and cold, of Lucy growing up without a mother, of me going through the motions of living without actually living. You changed that. You brought warmth back to this place. You made Lucy laugh again. You made me remember there's more to life than just work and grief. That's gratitude, not a reason to marry someone. Maybe, but it's also practical. You need a husband to strengthen your claim to Thomas. I need a wife to help raise Lucy. We work well together. We respect each other. That's more than a lot of marriages start with. Ethan reached out and touched Thomas's tiny hand with one finger. And I'll be honest with you, watching you fight for this boy, watching you refuse to give up even when it looked hopeless, that meant something to me. You're strong, Eliza. Stronger than you think. And you're exactly the kind of woman I'd want helping me raise my daughter. Eliza's mind was racing, trying to process what he was offering. Marriage, security, protection for Thomas, a father for her son and a mother figure for Lucy. It made sense on paper, made practical sense in every way that mattered. But marriage without love felt like a betrayal of something she couldn't quite name. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. What if you regret it? What if Cornelius Ashford takes Thomas? Ethan's voice was gentle but firm. What if you lose your son because you were too afraid to accept help? Can you live with that risk? The words struck home because Eliza had already been asking herself the same question. Could she let pride or fear or propriety stand between her and the one thing that would make it nearly impossible for Cornelius to take Thomas? A legitimate marriage, a stable home, a father figure who would fight for her son? These were weapons she didn't currently have in her arsenal. Lucy had been silent through this whole exchange, but now she spoke up. Will you be my mama if you marry Papa? Eliza looked down at the girl, at her hopeful face and her wide eyes, and felt something crack in her chest. Would you want me to be? More than anything, Lucy's voice was fierce with certainty. I don't remember my real mama very well anymore. Sometimes I try to remember her face, and I can't. But you're here now, you're real, and you make everything better. Lucy, Ethan said softly, that's not fair to Mrs. Moore. She needs to make this decision without... No, Eliza interrupted. She's right. She deserves to have a say in this. She looked at Lucy, really looked at her. If I marry your father, I promise I'll do my best to be a good mother to you, not to replace your mama. No one could do that, but to love you and take care of you the way you deserve. Can you accept that? Yes. Lucy launched herself at Eliza, wrapping thin arms around her neck. Yes, please. Please marry Papa and stay forever. Over Lucy's shoulder, Eliza met Ethan's eyes. She saw hope there, and determination, and something that might have been the beginning of deeper feelings, though neither of them would name it yet. It wasn't love, not the romantic kind that poets wrote about, but it was real and solid and possibly enough to build something lasting on. All right, Eliza heard herself say, the words coming from somewhere beyond conscious thought. I'll marry you. But we need to be clear about what this is. We're doing this for practical reasons, for Thomas, for Lucy, to keep Cornelius from having any leverage against us. This isn't a love match. Understood. Ethan's relief was visible. We'll keep our own rooms, live our own lives in many ways. But to the outside world, we'll be a proper married couple. No one will have reason to question it or use it against us. When? Tomorrow. I'll ride to town first thing, arrange it with the minister. We can be married by afternoon if we move quickly. Ethan stood, his movements decisive. The sooner it's done, the sooner you're protected. This is crazy, Eliza murmured, but she was already thinking through logistics, already planning what she'd wear, how she'd explain this to Dr. Morrison when he came for his follow-up visit. Completely crazy. Best decisions usually are. Ethan moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. Eliza, thank you for agreeing to this, for trusting me enough to take this risk. Thank you for offering. Not many men would. Then not many men are worth knowing. He gave her a small nod and left, his footsteps echoing down the stairs, leaving Eliza alone with Lucy and Thomas and the momentous decision she'd just made. Lucy climbed onto the bed, bouncing slightly with excitement. You're going to be my mama, really and truly. Really and truly, Eliza confirmed, trying to make her voice sound confident even as her mind whirled with doubts and questions. But Lucy, you need to understand, this isn't a fairy tale. Your papa and I are getting married to help keep Thomas safe and to give you the family you need. It might take time for it to feel normal. I don't care. You'll be here. That's what matters. Lucy lay down on her pallet, her face glowing with happiness. Can I call you Mama now, or do I have to wait until after the wedding? The question squeezed Eliza's heart. You can call me whatever feels right to you, sweetheart. Mama? Lucy whispered, testing the word. Mama, I like how that sounds. Eliza blinked back tears, cradling Thomas close. In the space of a few minutes, her entire future had shifted, reorganized itself into something she'd never imagined. Tomorrow she would marry a man she barely knew, would become stepmother to his daughter, and create a legal shield around her son. It was practical, sensible, necessary, and terrifying. But as she looked at Lucy's peaceful face and felt Thomas's steady breathing against her chest, Eliza knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever came next, whatever challenges Cornelius Ashford threw at them, at least they'd face it together. At least Thomas would have a father's name, a stable home, the protection of a family. At least she wouldn't be alone anymore. She lay awake long into the night, Thomas sleeping in his cradle beside her bed and Lucy curled up on her pallet, both children peaceful and safe. Eliza stared at the ceiling and tried to imagine what tomorrow would bring, tried to picture herself as Ethan Cole's wife, as Lucy's mother, as someone with the legal right to fight for her son. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in months. Morning came too quickly and not quickly enough. Eliza rose before dawn out of habit, then remembered that today was different. Today was her wedding day, and felt her stomach flip with nerves. She fed Thomas, helped Lucy dress, and tried to make herself presentable with the limited wardrobe she possessed. Her best dress was a simple gray cotton that had seen better days, but it would have to do. She had no jewelry, no veil, nothing that would mark this as a special occasion. Ethan came to her door as the sun was rising, dressed in his Sunday clothes. She hadn't even known he owned Sunday clothes. He looked awkward and formal and somehow younger without his usual work attire. "I'm heading to town," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I'll arrange everything with Reverend Phillips. We can be married this afternoon if you're still willing." "I'm willing." Eliza's voice was steady, even if her hands weren't. "Ethan, what will we tell people about why we're doing this so suddenly?" "The truth, mostly. That we care about each other, that it makes sense for the household, that it's time. People will make their own assumptions, and we'll let them." He finally looked at her directly. "Some will think I'm taking advantage. Others will think you trapped me. The important thing is that we know the truth, and we present a united front." "What about Cornelius? When he finds out, let him find out. Let him rage and threaten and try to intimidate. By the time he learns about the marriage, It'll be too late for him to stop it. Ethan's expression hardened. And if he tries to claim it was done under duress or for fraudulent purposes, we'll have witnesses who saw us marry of our own free will. Reverend Phillips, the ranch hands, anyone else who wants to attend. The logic was sound, but Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that they were poking a sleeping bear, that Cornelius's retaliation would be swift and merciless. Still, what choice did she have? Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. Maybe fighting back with Ethan's support and a legal marriage to strengthen her position was the only path left. "I'll be ready," she said. "We'll be ready." Ethan nodded and left, taking Jackson with him to town. The hours that followed felt both endless and impossibly short. Eliza tried to occupy herself with normal tasks, cooking, cleaning, caring for Thomas and Lucy, but her mind kept drifting to what was coming. By afternoon, she would be married. By evening, she would be Eliza Cole, wife of a rancher, stepmother to Lucy, secured in her position with a legitimacy that Cornelius couldn't easily attack. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like stepping off a cliff and hoping someone would catch her. Lucy helped her prepare, brushing out Eliza's hair and braiding it in a style more elaborate than Eliza usually wore. The girl chattered constantly, her excitement impossible to contain, and Eliza let the words wash over her without really hearing them. She was too focused on controlling her breathing, on keeping her hands from shaking, on not thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. The sound of horses approaching made them both freeze. Eliza moved to the window and saw Ethan returning with not just Jackson, but also Dr. Morrison, Mrs. Harrison, and her daughter Elizabeth, and Reverend Phillips, a thin man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Behind them came two of the ranch hands, dressed in their best clothes, and to Eliza's surprise, even Patricia Hendricks and one of her brothers. "He invited the whole county," Eliza murmured, understanding dawning. Witnesses. Ethan was making sure there would be plenty of respectable witnesses to this marriage, people who could testify that it was legitimate, that both parties had entered into it willingly and properly. "Come on, Mama," Lucy said, using the word naturally now. "We need to go downstairs." "Mama." Eliza let the word settle over her, trying it on for size. In a few hours, it would be official. She would be Lucy's mother-in-law, if not yet in complete feeling, would have the right to protect and care for her, to make decisions about her welfare. She picked up Thomas, who was mercifully content and calm, and followed Lucy downstairs. The main room had been hastily arranged for a ceremony, chairs borrowed from the dining table and set up in rows, wildflowers from the creek arranged in jars. Lucy's doing, probably. Reverend Phillips stood at one end of the room with his Bible, and Ethan stood beside him looking uncomfortable but determined. When Ethan saw Eliza on the stairs, something in his expression shifted, softened. He moved toward her almost involuntarily, then stopped himself, waiting for her to come to him instead. Eliza descended slowly, aware of every eye on her, aware of the speculation and judgment and curiosity radiating from their witnesses. Elizabeth Harrison looked like she'd bitten into something sour. Patricia Hendricks watched with sharp calculation. Dr. Morrison seemed merely puzzled but not displeased. Mrs. Harrison's expression was thoughtfully neutral, and the ranch hands looked proud, as if they'd personally arranged this match. Eliza reached Ethan's side and stopped, looking up at him uncertainly. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, then took Thomas from her arms and handed the baby to Lucy. "Hold your brother for a moment, sweetheart." Lucy beamed, cradling Thomas with exaggerated care, and Ethan turned back to Eliza. He took both her hands in his calloused palms warm and steady, and faced Reverend Phillips. "We're ready," Ethan said simply. The ceremony was brief, almost perfunctory. Reverend Phillips spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about commitment and partnership and building a life together. He asked if there were any objections. Eliza held her breath during that pause, half expecting Patricia Hendricks to speak up, but silence reigned. Then came the vows, simple words that carried enormous weight. "Do you, Ethan Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." Ethan's voice was clear and firm. "And do you, Eliza Moore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part. Eliza opened her mouth and found she couldn't speak. The magnitude of what she was doing crashed over her. She was binding herself to this man, this stranger, for the rest of her life. Whatever happened now, whatever came next, they would face it together, for better or worse. "I do," she finally whispered. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Reverend Phillips smiled kindly. "You may kiss the bride." Ethan hesitated, then leaned down and pressed a chaste kiss to Eliza's forehead. Nothing more. It was respectful, almost brotherly, and somehow that made it easier to bear. This wasn't a romantic union. This was a partnership, a practical arrangement between two people trying to protect their children. But when Ethan pulled back and looked into her eyes, Eliza saw something there that suggested maybe, someday, it could become more than just practical. Maybe, given time and trust and shared struggles, they could build something real from this foundation of necessity. "Mrs. Cole," Ethan said softly, testing out her new name. "Mr. Cole," she replied, and felt the weight of that name settling onto her shoulders like a mantle. She was Eliza Cole now. Wife, stepmother, protected and protecting. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The witnesses applauded politely, and Lucy let out a whoop of joy that made everyone laugh. The tension broke, and suddenly people were offering congratulations, shaking Ethan's hand, kissing Eliza's cheek with varying degrees of sincerity. Dr. Morrison looked pleased, as if this marriage solved some medical problem he'd been puzzling over. Mrs. Harrison was cordial, though Elizabeth looked like she might be ill. Patricia Hendricks offered tight congratulations that didn't reach her eyes, but she signed the marriage certificate as a witness without complaint. It was done. Legal, official, witnessed by respectable members of the community. Cornelius Ashford could rage all he wanted. Eliza was a married woman now, with a husband who'd already proven he'd fight for her son. As the witnesses began to disperse, Ethan moved to her side and spoke quietly. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet." Eliza watched Lucy playing with Thomas, the girl's face glowing with happiness. "Ask me again tomorrow." "Fair enough." Ethan's hand found hers, squeezed briefly. "For what it's worth, I think we made the right choice." "I hope you're right." Eliza squeezed back, then released his hand. "I really hope you're right." That night, after all the guests had left and Lucy was finally asleep, Eliza sat in her room, not their room, they'd agreed on that, and tried to process everything that had happened. She was married. After all these months of being alone, of being vulnerable, of running and hiding, she now had a husband, a home, a measure of security. It should have felt like victory, but instead it felt like she'd traded one form of uncertainty for another. What would married life with Ethan actually look like? How would they navigate the awkwardness of being legal partners without being romantic ones? And when Cornelius inevitably returned, would this marriage be enough to stop him, or would it just give him new ammunition to use against her? Questions for another day. Tonight, Eliza allowed herself to simply exist in this new reality, to be Eliza Cole for the first time, to imagine a future where she and Thomas might actually be safe. It was the most hope she'd felt in a very long time. The morning after the wedding dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through Eliza's window with an intensity that felt almost mocking. She'd barely slept, her mind too full of what she'd done, what it meant, what would come next. When Thomas woke demanding to be fed, she was almost grateful for the distraction, for something concrete and immediate to focus on instead of the swirling uncertainty in her chest. She emerged from her room to find Ethan already in the kitchen, coffee brewing and breakfast laid out on the table. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment they simply stared at each other, husband and wife in name, but still strangers in so many ways. "Morning," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Morning." Eliza shifted Thomas to her other hip, suddenly unsure of how to act. What was expected of her now? "You made breakfast. Seemed fair since you've been doing it every day since you got here." Ethan poured her coffee, adding sugar the way she liked without asking. He'd noticed, apparently. "Sit, eat. We need to talk about what happens next." Eliza sat, settling Thomas in her lap while she picked at the eggs and bacon Ethan had prepared. They were edible, if not inspired, and she found herself strangely touched that he'd tried. What is there to talk about? We're married. We wait for Cornelius to make his move. It's more than that. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. Yesterday changed things, Eliza. We need to figure out how this is actually going to work. How we present ourselves to Lucy, to the ranch hands, to anyone who might be watching. I thought we agreed. Separate rooms, separate lives in many ways. A practical arrangement. We did. But practical doesn't mean cold. Lucy's watching us, learning from us. If we act like polite strangers under the same roof, she'll know something's wrong. Children always know. Ethan's expression softened. I'm not saying we need to pretend some grand passion, but we should at least be friendly. Partners. People who chose each other, even if the reasons were complicated. He was right, of course. Eliza had been so focused on the legal protections marriage would provide that she hadn't fully considered the day-to-day reality of living as someone's wife. What do you suggest? We start small, eat meals together, all of us. Talk about our days, share the work of running this household. Let Lucy see us as a team, as people who respect each other and work well together. The rest, he trailed off, seeming uncertain. The rest we'll figure out as we go. That sounds reasonable. Eliza took a sip of her coffee, letting the warmth of it steady her. Ethan, thank you for doing this, for marrying me to help protect Thomas. I know it's asking a lot. You're not asking. I offered. There's a difference. Ethan's gray eyes held hers. And I meant what I said at the wedding. This house needed you. Lucy needed you. Maybe I needed you too, though I was too stubborn to admit it for a while. Before Eliza could respond, Lucy burst into the kitchen, still in her nightgown, her hair a wild tangle around her face. You're both up. Are we a real family now? Can we do family things? What kind of family things did you have in mind? Ethan asked, smiling at his daughter's enthusiasm. I don't know. Things families do, like going on picnics or working together in the garden or singing songs after supper. Lucy climbed into the chair next to Eliza, reaching out to touch Thomas's hand. Mama used to do those things with me, before she got sick. The casual use of Mama directed at Eliza made her throat tighten. She met Ethan's eyes over Lucy's head and saw her own uncertainty reflected there. They were stepping into enormous shoes, trying to fill spaces left by people who were gone but not forgotten. We can do those things, Eliza said gently. Maybe not all at once, but we can try. What would you like to do first? Can we work in the garden today? There are still some vegetables that need harvesting, and Mama always said working with plants was peaceful. Lucy's voice was wistful. I haven't been out there much since she died. It made Papa too sad. Ethan cleared his throat roughly. It did. It does. But maybe it's time to change that. Maybe it's time to make new memories there instead of just mourning old ones. They spent that morning in the garden, the three of them plus Thomas sleeping peacefully in a basket under the shade of a cottonwood tree. The garden was overgrown but not beyond saving, and as they worked together pulling weeds and harvesting late summer squash and beans, something began to shift between them. They fell into an easy rhythm, passing tools and sharing the work, and Lucy's chatter filled the spaces that might otherwise have been awkward. Mama used to say that gardens were like families, Lucy said at one point, carefully picking tomatoes and placing them in a basket. They need tending and care, and sometimes they get messy, but that's okay because growing things is always a little messy. Your mama was a wise woman, Eliza replied, meaning it. The more she learned about Sarah Cole, the more she respected the woman who'd come before her, who'd created this home and raised this remarkable child. Ethan had gone quiet, but when Eliza glanced at him, she saw peace in his expression rather than pain. He was working the soil with his hands, and there was something meditative about the motion, something healing. Maybe Lucy was right. Maybe it was time to reclaim this space, to let it be a place of life again instead of a memorial to loss. They were carrying their harvest back to the house when they heard horses approaching at speed, multiple riders moving with purpose. Ethan's entire demeanor changed instantly, his body going tense and alert. He handed his basket to Lucy and moved to intercept the visitors before they reached the house, positioning himself between his family and whatever was coming. Eliza's heart hammered as she recognized the lead rider. Cornelius Ashford sat tall in his saddle, his expensive clothes dusty from travel, but his bearing as imperious as ever. Behind him rode 4 men, lawyers or hired muscle. Eliza couldn't tell which. Maybe both. "There you are," Cornelius said, his voice dripping with false cordiality as his eyes found Eliza. "I was beginning to think you'd vanished into thin air, Elizabeth. Clever of you to change your name, but not quite clever enough." "Her name is Eliza Cole," Ethan said flatly, moving to stand beside Eliza. "And you're trespassing on my property, Mr. Ashford. State your business or leave." Cornelius's gaze shifted to Ethan, assessing and dismissive in equal measure. "Ah, yes, the rancher who lied to me about my daughter-in-law's whereabouts. I don't appreciate being lied to, Mr. Cole. I don't appreciate rich men showing up at my ranch making demands. Seems we're both disappointed." Ethan's voice was cold. "Now, what do you want?" "What I want is to reclaim my grandson from unsuitable guardianship." Cornelius dismounted, his movements precise and controlled. "Elizabeth ran away with my son's child, fled across state lines, and has been living in questionable circumstances ever since. I'm here to correct that mistake." "I didn't run away," Eliza said, finding her voice despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I left because you were trying to take my son from me. Thomas is mine. You have no right to him." "I have every right. James was my son, which makes Thomas my grandson and heir. You're a nobody from nowhere, Elizabeth. You were never good enough for my James, and you're certainly not fit to raise an Ashford." Cornelius's smile was cold. "I've brought legal documents. A judge in Pittsburgh has already reviewed the case and agreed that the boy would be better off in my custody. All that's left is to collect him." "That judge doesn't have jurisdiction here," Ethan pointed out. "This is Kansas, not Pennsylvania. Your Eastern papers don't mean much out here. Which is why I've also obtained a writ from the territorial court." One of the men behind Cornelius produced a folder, holding it up. "Everything is in order, I assure you. Now, Elizabeth, if you'll simply hand over the boy, we can all avoid any unpleasantness." "No." The word burst from Eliza before she could think. "No, you're not taking him. I won't let you. You don't have a choice in the matter. The law is on my side." Cornelius took a step forward, and Ethan immediately moved to block him. They stood facing each other, the older man's money and power against the younger man's physical presence and determination. "Actually, she does have a choice," Ethan said quietly. "And so do I. You see, Mr. Ashford, you're operating under outdated information. Eliza isn't a destitute widow living in questionable circumstances anymore. As of yesterday, she's my wife, which makes me Thomas's legal father and guardian." The satisfaction Eliza felt at watching Cornelius's expression falter was immense. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with calculation. "You married her? How convenient. Almost suspiciously convenient, given the timing." "The timing worked for both of us. We'd been courting for weeks, and it seemed right to make it official." Ethan's lie was smooth and confident. "We have witnesses. Reverend Phillips, Dr. Morrison, several prominent members of the community, all perfectly legal and above board. So your custody claim is no longer valid. Thomas has 2 parents, a stable home, and a secure future. There's nothing for you to contest." Cornelius's face had gone red with barely contained rage. "This is a sham, a fraud perpetrated to circumvent legitimate legal proceedings. You can't possibly expect— I expect you to get back on your horse and leave my property," Ethan interrupted, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "Your grandson is being raised by loving parents in a good home. That should be enough for any reasonable man. But if you're not reasonable, if you try to push this despite the facts, then we'll fight you every step of the way. And I promise you, Mr. Ashford, fighting in Kansas territory is very different from fighting in Pittsburgh. Out here, a man's character matters more than his bank account." "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Cornelius hissed. "I have resources, connections, power beyond anything you can imagine. I can destroy you, ruin your little ranch, make sure you never—" "Papa!" Lucy's frightened cry cut through Cornelius's threats. She'd dropped her basket and was pointing back toward the house, where smoke was beginning to curl from one of the barn windows. "The barn's on fire!" Everything happened at once. Ethan cursed and ran toward the barn, shouting for the ranch hands. Cornelius and his men exchanged glances, and Eliza saw something flicker across the old man's face. Surprise, yes, but also something that looked uncomfortably like guilt. Had he arranged this? Was this his backup plan if intimidation didn't work? But there was no time to pursue that thought. Smoke was already billowing more thickly, and Eliza could hear the panicked sounds of horses trapped inside. She thrust Thomas into Lucy's arms. "Take your brother into the house. Lock the doors. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." "But Mama—" "Now, Lucy!" Eliza was already running toward the barn, where Ethan and two ranch hands were trying to get the doors open against the pressure of frightened animals inside. The heat was intense, the smoke choking, and she could see flames licking up one wall where hay had caught fire. "Get the horses out," Ethan shouted, his face already streaked with soot. "Jackson, take the south stalls. Tom, get water buckets started. We need to contain this before it spreads to the house." Eliza didn't think, just acted. She grabbed a cloth, soaked it in the water trough, and tied it over her nose and mouth before plunging into the smoke-filled barn. The horses were screaming with terror, kicking at their stall doors, and she made her way to the nearest one by feel more than sight. Her hands found the latch, yanked it open, and the horse bolted past her toward the door, nearly knocking her down in its panic. She moved to the next stall, and the next, working alongside Ethan and the ranch hands to free every trapped animal. The heat was unbearable, the smoke so thick she could barely see her hand in front of her face. But she kept going, driven by some instinct deeper than fear, by the knowledge that this ranch was her home now. These animals were under her care, and she'd be damned if she'd let Cornelius Ashford's machinations destroy what they'd built. Finally, the last horse was out. Ethan grabbed Eliza's arm and dragged her from the barn just as a part of the roof collapsed inward with a shower of sparks. They stumbled into the yard, coughing and gasping, and Eliza saw that Cornelius and his men had actually joined the effort to contain the fire, forming a bucket brigade from the well to throw water on the flames. It took 2 hours to get the fire under control. By the time the last ember was doused, the barn was a partial ruin. 2 walls standing, but the roof gone and the interior gutted. Several of the ranch hands had minor burns. Ethan's hands were blistered and raw, and everyone was covered in soot and ash. But they'd saved it, barely. But they'd saved it. And more importantly, they'd saved the animals and prevented the fire from spreading to the house or other buildings. Eliza collapsed onto the ground, her lungs burning, her hands shaking with delayed reaction. Ethan sank down beside her, and for a long moment they just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, breathing hard and trying to process what had just happened. "Everyone all right?" Ethan finally asked, his voice hoarse. "We're fine, boss," Jackson called back. "Nothing that won't heal. Could have been a lot worse." Cornelius approached slowly, his expensive clothes ruined by smoke and ash. He looked diminished somehow, the fire having stripped away some of his imperious bearing. "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Cole, I owe you an explanation." "You owe us more than that," Ethan growled. "Did you arrange this? Was this your plan B if you couldn't take Thomas legally?" "No." Cornelius's denial was sharp and immediate. "Absolutely not. I would never endanger a child or innocent people. When I saw the smoke, I realized how far I'd let my obsession go, how close I came to causing real harm." Eliza stared at him, trying to read the truth in his soot-stained face. "What are you saying?" Cornelius was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. "I'm saying I've been a fool. A stubborn, prideful fool who couldn't accept that my son made his own choices, including marrying you. James loved you, Elizabeth. Eliza. He wrote to me about you, told me how happy you made him, how you were everything he'd ever wanted. But I couldn't see past my own prejudices, my own ideas about what the Ashford family should be. So why come after Thomas? Why try to take him from his mother?" Ethan's voice was hard, unforgiving. "Because I'm a lonely old man who lost his only child and thought he could fill that hole by controlling his grandson's future." Cornelius looked directly at Eliza. "But watching you run into that burning barn without hesitation, risking your life to save animals that aren't even yours, that's not the behavior of someone unfit. That's courage. That's character. That's exactly the kind of mother Thomas needs." Eliza felt tears cutting tracks through the soot on her face, but she couldn't tell if they were from emotion or just smoke irritation. "Are you saying you'll leave us alone?" You'll give up this custody claim? I'm saying more than that. Cornelius pulled papers from his jacket, miraculously still intact despite everything, and tore them slowly, deliberately, into pieces. I'm saying I was wrong. Thomas belongs with you. He belongs here, with people who clearly love him and will fight for him. His voice cracked slightly. I would like to know my grandson, if you'll allow it. Perhaps visit occasionally, send gifts on birthdays. But his home is here, with you and your husband and your family. I see that now. Ethan's arm came around Eliza's shoulders, solid and supportive. That'll be up to Eliza. He's her son. She decides who gets to be in his life. Eliza looked at Cornelius, really looked at him, and saw an old man who'd made mistakes, who'd let grief and pride cloud his judgment, but who seemed genuinely remorseful. She thought about Thomas growing up knowing he had a grandfather who cared about him, even if that grandfather lived far away. She thought about the possibility of reconciliation, of building bridges instead of burning them. You can visit, she said slowly, once or twice a year with advance notice. You can write to Thomas, send him letters as he grows up. But you have to respect our authority as his parents. You can't undermine us or try to take him away. And if you ever threaten this family again, I won't. You have my word. Cornelius extended his hand to Ethan, who hesitated before shaking it. Then he turned to Eliza and did something that shocked her. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect. Thank you for giving me a chance to be a grandfather instead of an enemy. And Elizabeth, Eliza, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I treated you when James was alive, for not seeing your worth, for trying to take your son. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. It wasn't complete forgiveness, not yet. There was too much hurt, too many wounds that would take time to heal. But it was a beginning, a fragile piece that might grow into something more solid with effort from both sides. Cornelius and his men left an hour later, promising to return in 6 months for a proper visit with Thomas. Eliza watched them ride away, feeling lighter than she had in months. The threat that had been hanging over her head was gone. Thomas was safe. They were safe. We need to clean up, Ethan said, surveying the damaged barn with a grimace. Going to take weeks to rebuild. We'll manage. Eliza looked at the house where Lucy was watching from the window with Thomas in her arms. We've got help. We've got each other. We'll figure it out. Yes, Ethan said, his voice soft. I suppose we will. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and gradual healing. The barn was rebuilt, better and stronger than before, with help from neighboring ranches who showed up without being asked. The frontier way of supporting your own. Eliza found herself accepted into the community in ways she hadn't expected, the fire having somehow proven her commitment to this place and these people. Her relationship with Ethan evolved slowly, carefully, like plants growing toward sunlight. They still kept separate rooms, but they'd begun spending evenings together after Lucy was asleep, talking about the day's events, planning for the future, slowly learning each other's stories and scars. There were moments of awkwardness, times when they bumped up against the boundaries of their arrangement and had to navigate what came next. But there were also moments of connection, of genuine warmth and affection that had nothing to do with practicality. The way Ethan's face softened when he watched Eliza with Thomas. The way Eliza found herself looking for Ethan throughout the day, wanting to share small observations or funny moments. The way they'd both stopped referring to their marriage as a practical arrangement and started calling it simply our marriage. Lucy blossomed under the attention of two parents who were learning how to be a family. Her nightmares about the storm faded. Her laughter became more frequent. She started calling Eliza Mama without any hesitation, and Eliza's heart swelled every time she heard it. Thomas thrived, growing strong and healthy, babbling his way toward first words and showing signs of the determined personality that had kept him fighting through his illness. Watching him, Eliza sometimes thought about James, about how he'd never get to see his son grow up. But the grief was gentler now, softened by gratitude for the life she'd been given instead of the one she'd lost. It was late September when Ethan found her in the garden one evening, just as the sun was setting and painting the prairie gold. She was pulling the last of the summer vegetables, preparing the beds for winter, lost in thought. "Eliza," he said quietly, and she looked up to find him standing there with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Can we talk?" "Of course." She set down her basket and wiped dirt from her hands. "Is something wrong?" No, nothing's wrong. He seemed to struggle for words, which was unusual for him. I've been thinking about something. About us. About this arrangement we made. Eliza's heart sank. She'd known this was too good to last, had known that eventually reality would intrude on this fragile piece they'd built. If you want to change the terms, if this isn't working, that's not what I'm saying. Ethan moved closer, his eyes serious. I'm saying that somewhere along the way, this stopped being an arrangement for me. Somewhere between the wedding and the fire and rebuilding the barn and all these evenings talking until late at night, I started to care about you. Not as a housekeeper or even as my wife in name only. As you. As Eliza. The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Eliza's breath caught. Ethan, I know we agreed this would be practical. I know we said it wasn't a love match, and I'm not asking you to suddenly feel something you don't feel. I'm telling you that I do. Feel something, something real. He reached out and took her dirt-smudged hand in his. And if there's any chance, any possibility that you might feel the same way, or might come to feel it someday, I'd like to know. Because I'm tired of keeping separate rooms and pretending this is just business. I want more than that, Eliza. I want a real marriage with you, if you'll have it. Eliza looked at their joined hands, at this man who'd saved her and Thomas, who'd stood beside her against Cornelius Ashford, who'd built her a home and given her a family. She thought about all the small moments between them, the gradual building of trust and affection, the way her heart had started beating faster when he walked into a room. I feel it too, she whispered. I've been feeling it for weeks, but I didn't know if I was allowed to, if it violated our agreement, if you still loved Sarah too much to— I'll always love Sarah, Ethan interrupted gently. She was my first love, Lucy's mother, but I learned something these past months. The heart doesn't run out of room, it just expands. Makes space for new love alongside the old. And I have space for you, Eliza. So much space. She laughed, a sound caught between tears and joy. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I'll work on my poetry, he said, smiling. Then, more seriously, is that a yes? Will you let this be real? Will you be my wife in truth, not just on paper? Yes. Eliza stepped into his arms, letting herself be held, feeling the strength of him surrounding her. Yes. I'll be your wife. For real this time. For always. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the chaste kiss at their wedding. It was deep and sweet and full of promise, full of all the feelings they'd been holding back, all the possibility of their shared future. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Eliza saw tears on Ethan's face matching her own. Come on, he said, taking her hand. Let's go tell Lucy she's going to have a real family. Not just on paper, but in every way that matters. They walked back to the house together as the last light faded from the sky, ready to begin the next chapter of their lives. Not as strangers bound by convenience, but as partners bound by choice, by respect, by growing love that would only deepen with time. Lucy was on the porch with Thomas, teaching him to clap his hands, and when she saw her parents approaching hand in hand, her face lit up with understanding and joy. Does this mean you love each other now? Really and truly? Really and truly, Eliza confirmed, sweeping Lucy into a hug while Ethan scooped up Thomas. We're a family, all of us, forever. Forever, Lucy repeated, satisfied. I knew you would. I told Thomas you would, and I was right. Standing there on that porch with the three people who'd become her entire world, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. She'd arrived at this ranch with nothing but a desperate plea for milk, expecting to be turned away, hoping only to survive another day. Instead, she'd found a home, a purpose, a daughter, and a love she'd never anticipated. She thought about the wildflowers that grew in the field beyond the barn, how they'd started small but had spread and thrived, turning a patch of empty prairie into something beautiful. Her life felt like that now, started from almost nothing, nurtured with care and determination, blooming into something more wonderful than she could have imagined. The future stretched out before them, full of possibilities. There would be challenges, certainly, more storms to weather, more obstacles to overcome, more moments of doubt and difficulty. But they would face them together, this family they'd built from necessity and transformed through love. As autumn deepened into winter and winter gave way to spring, Eliza and Ethan fell into the rhythms of true partnership. The separate rooms were abandoned in favor of sharing one, their marriage becoming real in every sense. Lucy thrived with two parents who showed her daily what love and commitment looked like. Thomas grew strong and adventurous, learning to walk and babble his way toward speech, completely unaware of how close he'd come to being taken away. When Cornelius returned 6 months later as promised, he was welcomed as a grandfather rather than an enemy. He brought gifts, told stories about James's childhood that made Eliza laugh and cry, and left after 3 days with promises to write regularly and return in another 6 months. The peace between them wasn't perfect, but it was real, built on mutual respect and love for the child who connected them. The garden flourished under Eliza's care, providing abundance for the family and enough to share with neighbors. The barn stood strong and weatherproof, filled with healthy animals and the sounds of ranch life. The house transformed from a sparse dwelling into a warm home, filled with laughter and Lucy's chatter and Thomas's delighted squeals and the quiet conversations of two people learning how to love each other. Sometimes, in quiet moments, Eliza would stand at the edge of the wildflower field and look back at the house, at the life she'd built here. She thought about that first day, standing at the gate with her heart in her throat, asking for coins to buy milk. She'd been desperate then, running from the past, terrified of the future, hanging on by the thinnest of threads. Now she was Eliza Cole, wife and mother, partner in a working ranch, accepted member of a community, builder of a home and a family. The journey from that desperate woman at the gate to the woman she was now seemed impossible, miraculous, the kind of transformation that shouldn't have been possible. But it had happened, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one small act of courage followed by another. She'd rebuilt her life into something solid and real and beautiful. And when Ethan found her standing there, when he wrapped his arms around her from behind and pressed a kiss to her temple, when Lucy came running with Thomas toddling after her on unsteady legs, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. She'd come to Redfield Ranch needing milk for her baby. What she'd found was so much more: a home in the sunlight, a family born from necessity and strengthened by love, and a future that stretched out before her full of promise and possibility. The prairie wind whispered through the wildflowers, carrying with it the scent of growing things and new beginnings. Eliza closed her eyes and breathed it in, holding tight to the people she loved, grateful beyond measure for the second chance she'd been given. She'd needed coins for milk. Instead, she'd found everything she'd never known she was looking for: belonging, safety, love, and a place to call home. Not because she was rescued, but because she was strong enough to accept help when it was offered, brave enough to fight for what mattered, and wise enough to recognize that real family wasn't just about blood or obligation. It was about choosing each other every single day and building something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and determination and love. And as the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Eliza Cole stood surrounded by her family and knew that she had finally, truly come home. M.